Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is the May 11th, 2023 Planning Commission hearing, and we will call the hearing to order now at 1:01 p.m. Mrs. Sparza, can we please have a roll call vote? Excuse me, not the vote, just the roll call. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. I'll go ahead and take a roll call. Chair Bonderson.
Yes, here.
Vice Chair Bauke.
Here.
Commissioner Boss.
Present.
Commissioner DeLuccio.
Present.
Commissioner Lodge.
Here.
Commissioner Wardlow.
Here.
And Commissioner Wiscombe.
Here.
We have quorum. Thank you.
Thank you as well. And let's move on to our preliminary matters. So let's start with requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or ex-agenda items. So Ms. DeBusk, do we have any?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. I did want to announce that item 5, which is the 101 Garden Street project, has been postponed indefinitely at the applicant's request. They needed more time to prepare responses to the Planning Commission's comments, and so they requested that continuance. We don't have a date yet. We'll wait till we get their materials and then schedule it and renotice it.
Thank you, Mr. Busk. I have a commissioner comment. Commissioner Bauke?
Allison, did the applicant provide you something in writing? I'm used to when items are continued in other cities, there's actually something in writing or an email or something giving, the clear reasons for such.
Yes.
Did you get such?
They did submit an email, and we've been in contact with them. They'd submitted some information, but we're still trying to pull together some of the other information. And they also had a meeting with Coastal Commission, which took quite a while to get, and Coastal Commission has requested a follow-up meeting, so they want to make sure that happens before coming back to the Planning Commission.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And also, we have Commissioner Wardlow, please.
Thank you. Allison, is there more details as to the output of the Coastal Commission meeting with them that you can share with us, just for us to better understand kind of where the applicant is in that process?
Chair Bonderson, Commissioner Wardlow, we can't go into it at this time. It would be a violation of the Brown Act.
Thank you.
Commissioner DeLucia, please.
I'm not going to go on and on about it, but is it going to be a Coastal Commission meeting that is a public meeting, or just a conversation with some Coastal Commission
No, Commissioner
folks?
DeLucio, it's just an internal conversation with staff.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Ms. Ostringer and Ms. DeBusk, for trying to clarify as much information here as we could have. It's most appreciated. Let's move on. We will now move to announcements and appeals. Ms. DeBusk, do we have any?
Thank you. Nothing new, but I did want to let the commission know that the appeal of the project at 2315 Edgewater Way is scheduled for city council review on May 23rd, so that's a Tuesday. Commissioner Wiscombe will be representing the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Wonderful, so much going on. Thank you, Ms. DeBusk. So now we're on item C, review considerations and action on the following draft Planning Commission minutes. And we have two sets of minutes, so I've been informed we can break those up and take two separate votes. So first, we will begin with April 13, 2023 minutes and the resolution number 00323. These are both for 1617 and 1621 Anacapa Street. So I will begin by asking if there are any planning commissioner comments first, before we take a motion. Are there any comments on either one of those items?
I have a comment.
Commissioner DeLucio, please.
Yeah, I know this has been done already. I actually spoke to the secretary about adding my name to the roll call for all the April meetings. For the 3 meetings in April, my name was deleted just because it's a template. So it's been added to the template, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
And thank you, Commissioner DeLucio, for putting that on record here. It sounds like it's already been taken care of. Yes, perfect. Okay, so next, are there any public speaker comments for any of the minutes or resolutions at this time?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. We do not have any virtual participants nor any speaker slips for the minute approval. Back to you.
Excellent, thank you. So do we have a motion for April 13, 2023 minutes and the resolution, again, number 00323?
I move.
Yes, Commissioner Bauke, please.
Move to approve the April 13th, 2023 minutes.
I'll second that.
Thank you. And for the second, Commissioner DeLucio?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Yeah, I was moving both. Are there any discussions on the motion at this time? Is it the resolution? Yes, yes. So let's make sure, thank you for clarifying. Commissioner Bauke, could you just rephrase your motion to include the minutes for
The minutes of
13th?
April 13th and the corresponding resolution.
And I'll second that.
Okay, and just to be clear, the resolution, one more time, is 003-23. So now, if there are no other discussions on the motion, I'll give it a moment. No? Okay, so let's go ahead and do a roll call vote. Ms. Esparza, please.
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. I'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner Boss.
Yes.
Commissioner DeLucio.
Yes.
Commissioner Lodge.
Yes.
Commissioner Wardlow.
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe.
Yes.
Vice Chair Bauke.
Yes?
And Chair Bonderson.
Yes,
Motion passes. Thank you.
thank you so much. Let's move on. We are now going to take any comments from the planning commissioners on the April 20th, 2023 minutes. I see none. Are there any public speaker comments for these minutes, Ms. Esparza?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. We do not have any virtual participants, nor do we have any speaker slips for the approval of the minutes. So back to you.
Excellent, thank you. So now I'll go ahead and take a motion on the April 20th, 2023 minutes. And we have Commissioner Wiscombe, please.
Madam Chair, I'll move the minutes for the April 20th, 2023 meeting and with the addition of Commissioner DeLucio's name. Thank you.
Thank you as well. Appreciate the extra comment. Are there any discussions on, oh, yes, thank you. We need a second for this motion,
second
please.
it.
Thank you, Commissioner DeLucia, appreciate it. So is there any discussion on this motion? So, Ms. Esparza, take it away.
Thank you. I'll take the roll call vote. Commissioner DeLucio.
Yes.
Commissioner Lodge.
Yes.
Commissioner Wardlow.
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe.
Yes.
Commissioner Boss.
Yes.
Vice Chair Bauke.
Abstain?
And Chair Bonderson.
Yes,
Motion passes. Thank you.
thank you as well. Okay. All right, so now we're moving on to comments from members of the public pertaining to items that are not on today's agenda. So, Mrs. Esparza, do we have anyone in person or remote who would like to give public comment at this time?
Thank you, Chair Ponderson. I do not have any speaker slips for general public comment. If there is anyone in the audience who would like to speak for general business not on the agenda, please go ahead and fill out a speaker slip and turn it into me. We do not have any virtual participants. We did receive some written correspondence that was distributed to the commission prior to the meeting, and I still do not have any speaker slips, so back to the commission.
Wonderful, thank you, Mrs. Esparza. So now we'll move on to item 3 of our agenda, and this is an amendment to Single-Family Design Board appeal process. And for this, we are going to hear from Ms. Kokinda from the city. She's here to give us a presentation, so please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Bonderson, and good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Ellen Kokinda. I am a senior planner and the design review supervisor in the Planning Division. If I could ask, oh, Mrs. Esparza already pulled it up. So today I'm here to talk to you about an amendment to the Single Family Design Board appeal process. And as part of that, I just didn't want to bring that here to you without any context of what we've been working on. So I'm also going to be giving you an update of the Single Family Design Board process improvements and our effort here. I just want to acknowledge the person sitting behind me is Ted Hamilton-Roll, who is our new project planner in the design review, who's also helping out with this process improvement effort. So you may or may not be familiar, but the most recent changes that happened in the fall, we took an amendment to City Council to amend the Single Family Design Board makeup to go from 7 members to 5. We were really struggling with holding quorum. This was an acute issue. We lost several members. It was really hard to recruit, and so most recently, this Title 22 has been updated to amend so that we have 5 members, and then the makeup of that board is to be really flexible. There is one requirement for an architect on the Single Family Design Board, but just over time, we have been seeing more challenges, and to give you a little bit more context of why we're even working on this process improvement, if you recall, familiar with the Novak report that came out in 2020 that looked at our land development process and coming up with different improvements to streamline things. It was a huge effort, internal review as well as working with different constituents, our developers and applicant community. And one of the recommendations from this report was to eliminate the Single Family Design Board, or at least reassign its duties in order to streamline and simplify the land development process. Staff had quite a strong reaction to that because we felt like that was a recommendation, but we didn't necessarily agree with that, and particularly given the community history and how the Single Family Design Board and those regulations were developed. So that's not something that we're pursuing. But we're instead looking at a process improvement with the particular goals of how can we maintain something that's value added, specifically for single unit residential projects. We recognize that there's a huge number of projects that trigger a public hearing at SFDB, and there might be ways that we can work to streamline that and not necessarily subject such a large volume of projects to go to hearing. And then look for opportunities to expand administrative review. So still trigger design review, but maybe there's some objective criteria to achieve that. So that's a little bit of the background. Again, just a brief history, because some of you were here to develop the single-family design board and others are new to this commission. So the Neighborhood Preservation Ordinance was initially adopted in 1992, and it was the first time there was a creation for single-family design guidelines. Prior to that, the Architectural Board of Review, it expanded ABR, Architectural Board of Review's purview to include single-unit projects. And really, so much of the focus was on Hillside. The city wanted to have more oversight because of the sensitivity and the visibility of Hillside projects. And what was so critical about the creation of the Neighborhood Preservation Ordinance is really the first time that it created a public forum for single-unit residents, aside from the ones that were under HLC, or the Historic Landmark Commission review. So that kind of ABR started with this process, and over time, they just got bogged down by the sheer volume of projects, and they were holding meetings every week. So the SFDB was actually created after a 3-year process to update the Neighborhood Preservation Ordinance, and that was also, it was a massive effort to deal with the McMansionization that the city was seeing. So some of the homes along Shoreline, really massive developments without kind of trying to address scale, neighborhood compatibility and scale. So a lot of this was updated to work on those particular items. Most recently, I'm going to kind of transition of where we are in our process improvements. As I mentioned, we amended the makeup of the SFDB back in the fall. In February, we have, in collaboration with the AIA, our AIA partners have been a massive help in this effort. We launched an online survey to get input from our applicants, the design community, and different homeowners in the SFDB review process. We heard from over 230 respondents, and again, who've been subject to SFDB review within the last 3 years. So this was a 3-year kind of look back and reaching out. About half of the respondents were design professionals, and with a couple of land use planners, and about half were homeowners. So it was a really nice balance between the different constituent groups that we often get on the other side of the table at SFDB. We knew that in order to be responsible in our outreach, we couldn't just hear from the applicants because they tend to be have strong opinions about the design review process in general. So we really wanted to balance the conversation and try to create a full picture. So what that meant was we did end up reaching out. We had 9 one-on-one focus group conversations with individual SFDB board members, and that included both the current set of board members as well as past SFDB board members to get their insight. And then we also held 3 focus groups, and that was our chance to be able to dig in a little bit deeper beyond what we can do achieve on an online survey. So we had 2 focus groups with architects and design professionals, and one with our land use planning consultants who have a very incredible and helpful perspective. And you'll notice here that part of our outreach effort did not include members of the public more broadly, and that was intentional. Like, that was just a really kind of opening it up. And I think that despite the fact that that wasn't part of our outreach effort, I'm constantly doing, every time I attend an SFDB design review hearing, I'm observing what happens, I'm taking note, we're seeing things. We already know a lot of the challenges that they face, and I'm going to address those in this particular presentation. So I just want to call that out, as we haven't forgotten about them as well. No surprise necessarily that once we had our online survey, and when we kind of dug through all of the input and the topics, that there were strong opinions, and that they felt that the SFDB process adds time, money, and heartache. And I think that this kind of speaks to why the Novak Group, consulting group, felt, why don't you just eliminate this design review board entirely? So that was probably where some of that came from. So this is consistent what they heard and what we heard. Just to give you some perspective, we asked respondents to approximate the number of months it took for their most recent project to receive project design approval starting from initial submittal. And on average, for both consent and full board projects, we got feedback about half the respondents reported timelines within 6 months, with the average time time from submittal to project design approval being 8 months. Clearly, it's going to vary based on what type of project that you're going to be, whatever is proposed. But generally, we typically assume it'll take 5 to 6 months from initial application. Secondly, when we asked the respondents if they, did the feedback they received during SFDB hearings significantly alter project costs? And if yes, by how much? 63% of respondents reported no significant cost increase. However, the remaining 37% reported a cost increases, with the median being about $50,000. And then many of them cited delays in the time for approval, architect and designer fees by having to come back to all the different hearings and change your project and what that adds to the cost. And then requiring specific materials as being, again, the chief reason for the increased cost. And then we also asked respondents what type of comments made by the SFDB did they find helpful and unhelpful. By far, the most architectural style and neighborhood compatibility were the most unhelpful comments that respondents cited when asked to explain. And probably no surprise there, there's a lot of subjectivity, and that's the design review process. We'll get to that a little bit later. But what respondents did find helpful was site planning and different site considerations, and then just general neighborhood compatibility to a lesser extent. So once we got all of the survey results and we had our focus groups and our interviews with different one-on-one interviews with board members, we needed to synthesize all of this data and try to understand kind of where the tensions. Is there, where do people agree? What are the spotlights on some of those problem areas? And generally speaking, we were able to distill the issues down into 3 main problems. One is defining neighborhood compatibility. There's just so many varying opinions about what that means, and there's little guidance about what neighborhood compatibility is specifically related to architectural style. So there's very little substance and not as much clarity with that. Secondly, managing expectations. The applicants have expectations, board members have expectations about what they want to see before them and kind of the level, the quality of plans. And then certainly staff have their own expectations of like how we manage this process. But again, a lot of these expectations create tension points. And then lastly, we see this time and time again of the general lack of understanding. And this is where I'm going to point to more of the issues with people, our neighbors and neighborhood who are trying to participate in the process, that they're really just unequipped to participate effectively, many of them having never been to a public hearing before. So I just want to call out for today's conversation, I'm going to really focus on 2 of these problems because it's going to speak to the specific request for today. And so we'll get into those a little bit more deeply. Number 1 is defining compatibility. So if we look closer at the issue, it was really what we heard from applicants over and over and over again, that neighborhood compatibility is misconstrued to mean matching, that I have to match whatever is existing next door or whatever the dominant style, theme, size, all of that, and how that just, it really frustrates people, and we see a lot of back and forth over time. Secondly, neighborhoods in transition, looking at neighborhood compatibility when those guidelines were drafted, it was, the context of a neighborhood was very different than the context today. I mean, we see the Mesa is a good example, homes on Shoreline are a good example, the requests that are coming in. So it really makes it difficult for our current board members to know what am I reviewing? Should I consider today's development? Should I go back to what the intention was there? So there's challenge of understanding. And then personal interpretations. The fact that our single-family design guidelines, which are really excellent, by the way, but the fact that they don't speak much to architectural style means that board members over time have just relied on their own interpretation of it, and that changes depending on who's on the board and what the makeup of the board is. And so that, again, leaves for lack of certainty for applicants and frustrations and not knowing how to get their project through, essentially. Following this other problem a little bit more deeply, I talked, again, in general, that some people who attend SFDB hearings have never been to a public hearing before in their lives. You all see this too. SFDB is a little bit more common because, you know, it could be something coming in next door to them. So again, what I see is that they are often unequipped to participate effectively because they don't understand what SFDB's purview is. They come in talking about parking, talking about land use, talking about municipal code issues or building code. They don't know that the SFDB is there just specifically to look at aesthetics, neighborhood compatibility. They have to make certain findings. They don't understand the difference between standards and guidelines. So they'll point to the design guidelines and they'll think of those as, you have to follow this rule. This is a rule, and that's not the case. There's more, it's subjective, there's flexibility. We want people to achieve as much as possible, that's the point. But again, it's hard to point that out to people. People unfamiliar, members of the public unfamiliar with the public hearing procedures and decorum, you know, I'm having to manage on a bi-weekly basis, people trying to interrupt, speak out during the board's deliberations, and, you know, and it's really just, they're emotional. These are heated, dear topics to people, and so it's like, how can we level the playing field and help them understand what the process is? And then I have to point out the extremely awkward appeal process, and that's really, there's multiple appeal points. You can appeal project design approval, you can appeal final approval. What do those things even mean? They don't know how to prepare for an appeal, they don't know how to present arguments. Again, all things that by the time we get to an appeal stage, we want people to be successful in communicating their concerns, but we also need to respect process. And so we're just, again, how can we level the playing field? So what are our goals for this process? I kind of taking a step back, I've reiterated this, I've mentioned this at the beginning, but it's really important that we're reducing the SFDB project load. I have 2 staffers. SFDB has such a large volume of projects between consent and full board that it takes 2 staff to manage this. And I would argue, and I think we could all argue that staff time could be better used for developing policies, to coming back to you all with more land use stuff or any kinds of things, or process improvements. So, so that's a real sticking point for me in particular in design review. 2, we want to make sure we're maintaining a public forum. You know, that was one of the initial key elements of creating design, having a discretionary process for single-family projects. But we just want to subject projects to that public forum when it's the most, when there's the potential for the most impact to a neighbor or a neighborhood. But let's kind of reduce not everything have, in our discussions with board members and applicants alike, and even staff's opinion, have felt like not everything deserves a public hearing. And then how can we set expectations for success? And that's, you know, the whole idea of neighborhood compatibility. We could spend a lifetime on trying to define that and what it means, and it's never going to be perfection, so long as we like subjectivity in some ways, but we also like objectivity. We like black and white, but the beauty about discretionary design review is that there can be a little bit of looseness in helping that out, but we want to avoid, you know, the purple geodesic dome going next door. So, you know, having expectations of, we don't want to be, you know, how can we have draw a line, but also be loosey-goosey. So taking an even further step back of how did we get here? What is the real problem? First of all, we've had this over-reliance on design review. It's being more than it needs to. And October of 2017, when the City Council adopted the Title 30, the new zoning ordinance, there used to be, a lot of the things used to trigger modifications, a land use approval. It used to be really terrifying to come to the Planning Commission or the staff hearing officer. And we recognized at that time that, okay, maybe we don't have to subject applicants to that, but let's shift those things to SFDB or our other design review boards. And it's still to try to make things less processy. However, it was like a safe thing to kind of hang on to, that there is still going to be discretionary oversight. So some of those things we've added to their plate. Discretionary ADUs, there's just a whole list of things that got added after ENZO updates, after state legislation. It's like, oh, let it be a design review board decision rather than a staff, a ministerial or something that we write into code. It's still oversight, but how can we look at that? And so that's just the number of triggers have actually increased significantly. We have an inadequate housing stock in town. That is massive. Our post-World War II housing does not meet today's wants. Mr. Roll, Hamilton Roll, is here and has done all kinds of polling of data. The number of second-story additions that's happening is massive. Like, we're seeing new construction, substantial redevelopment, demo rebuilds. We're seeing second-story additions. We're seeing ADUs. So our homes are getting bigger, ADUs. We're densifying our lots. And that, too, is creating tension here. And that's just part of the state legislation that's kind of created a path for that. And that's just the reality, that the 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom home isn't really satisfying the need. And the lack of kind of your housing continuum for people to move out of those into the 3-bedroom, 2-bath is really unattainable financially for so many people. So people are often, I would characterize it as that if you are even a homeowner in Santa Barbara, many people are trying to work with what they have and on their current site. And then subjectivity of review, this really goes back to especially what we see with SFDB is that it's property rights versus neighbor opinion. And who's right? People are both right in that, I have the right to propose a home that meets every single zoning standard. What's wrong with that? I've followed your rules. But then it's also this question of, you're changing my neighborhood. It's this massive thing, or it's different, or it's not what I was expecting. And that too is, we've heard it and kind of see it play out in terms of neighborhood, like using neighborhood compatibility, or that was a lot of what kind of spoke to us in the survey about reading about neighborhood compatibility as a form of NIMBYism. So we do have some solutions. I'm not here just to present problems. One thing that I do want to say is that I'm going to concentrate again on these 2 items because they're going to be specific to you and future conversations that we'll have at the Planning Commission, but also for today's topic. One is we need to amend our findings, guidelines, codes, or just look at these different options as a package to see where we might be able to address some of these key problems. Secondly, we need to make sure that we have a shared understanding, that we're all clear on the roles and responsibilities so that we can have better public hearings and that SFDB board members feel like they have information, that they're not trying to fill in the gaps where applicants don't have enough information. So having expectations about hearings and what's expected and what you should bring and when. And then improved communication. So this is really how we can use our existing tools or build on those tools to make the process more accessible. So in terms of the findings, guidelines, and codes, the problem areas that I talked about, that architectural style, really want to be explicit about maybe there is a particular finding that allows to kind of help. The intention when these guidelines were created was to not mandate an architectural style throughout the city. I think there was recognition that a diversity of architectural style was really warranted and wanted, and that, a mandate to style is the El Pueblo Viejo. That's there are certain clear things, and that was an intentional decision not to do that. So kind of re-owning that and kind of bolstering that in any way we can look into that. Looking at mass, bulk, and scale and different ways to identify it or how to avoid arbitrary discussion and direction. I've been through meetings where the SFDB is saying, can you reduce that from 87% FAR to 86% without really an understanding of like, how does that affect the project? What does that mean by floor area? How does that benefit the frustrated neighbor next door? Is that going to do anything? And so again, trying to deal with some of those tensions and frustrations. Reducing the number of projects, that just by far allows us more time as staff, if just having to not process as many, to then have time to really be able to follow through and making sure that board members have the best plans for design review. Not just that it meets zoning codes, but that it's actually, these plans are substantive enough for them to actually do a great review. And then, of course, expand administrative approvals, and just what that means is staff approvals of, that their objective criteria that we can check off and, again, still have a little bit of oversight. And then improve communication. This is really to be able to get at the solution of how to standardize examples. With SFDB projects, the state of California does not mandate that you have an architect, that you do not have, that you don't have to be a licensed architect to submit a project. So we see all kinds of people who are trying to navigate the process by themselves without an agent or a professional. It can be really difficult. They're trying to save money. They might not have much. My goodness, if we could reduce the amount of time, heartache, or even cost that homeowners spend up front, and with these kind of standardized examples, then they'll, again, have better hearings in general, and the board will kind of know what to expect and try to be able to work with people where they are. Again, leveraging existing tools. We have a number of, our new website is really incredible to be able to do this efficiently and effectively. Again, trying to target some of those questions that come with what does it mean to participate in this process? What is this process? Knowing the difference between land use entitlements and design review and all of these different application completeness review, it's just, there's a lot that we could do to improve. And then the last one, which is, again, why I'm actually here today, but again, I think it's helpful for you to understand the context, is to amend the SFDB appeal process and reroute SFDB appeals to the Planning Commission in order for efficient, effective review, and then hopefully to reduce the number of appeal points over time. So what we're requesting today for you to consider is, again, to amend Title 22 69080 to direct SFDB appeals to the Planning Commission instead of City Council. You'll notice that this is only for Single-Family Design Board. We're not requesting this for the Architectural Board of Review or the Historic Landmarks Commission. Those are charter boards, and that's a kind of a separate track, a separate way of thinking, so it's not apples to apples. Why do we want to do this? Is that we're seeing a trend of increasing number of appeals. Generally, we've averaged about 2 appeals a year. That's kind of a historic average. I've had 5 in the last 6 months, and again, that could just be a statistical anomaly, but as I mentioned, the trend is that we're seeing second-story developments, we're seeing demo rebuilds, we're seeing ADUs that don't necessarily meet ministerial design criteria. These are all things that put them in the realm of discretionary design review and public hearing, and which means that they're appealable actions. So I think we can continue to see that increase. Secondly, there's streamlining benefits for appellants and applicants. It takes so much to even get to an appeal hearing at City Council. First, you have to schedule the actual date that you're going to set an appeal. So it's bureaucracy, it's pushing things back. And many of these projects, the ones that get appealed, often are the ones that took the longest through the process. So imagine a year and a half, 2 years, five SFDB hearings over that time, and then to have to wait another 3, 4, 5 months to get to City Council to even hear your project, to know what you're doing. It's maddening, and maybe it's not necessary. appeals are extremely staff intensive and involve multiple departments. For every appeal that goes to city council, there have to be at least 8 senior staff across city departments who are reading these staff reports, who are thinking about how are we communicating this, what's happening. It's just a lot of involvement, and there are different processes. So it's not just like the different individuals, but each department has their own processes for noticing, for writing staff reports, for their templates. I know that sounds kind of like big deal, but it just, if you don't do these all the time, it's really, it can just be onerous, unnecessarily so. And so it's nice to be able to house something, by housing something within a community development, within the Planning Commission, it does streamline it for us. And we have our one process for this, and makes it easier. And then I just want to point out that the Planning Commission is very much accustomed to plan review. Considering the land use and design impacts, you're very familiar with design guidelines and how those are applied. You're familiar with how the policies of how our zoning ordinance has been adopted over time. You're also most familiar with the cutting edge legislation and how that applies to different projects. Think of ADUs. So having that awareness and built in, like, you are the best equipped for these appeals. And then I have heard every time I have an appeal and I come up here and talk to council, they've all expressed displeasure reviewing SFDB appeals. It's tough. It's really not a pleasant thing to do. Entering a political landmine and having to kind of deal with the political realities of their position and just the discomfort of being representatives of a district. And so just, again, pointing out why we're here, it's just, you all don't necessarily have that same context as the Planning Commission. And why are we fast tracking this? So I did present these ideas to the Land Development Team Oversight Subcommittee. This is a city council subcommittee that was created as a result of the Novak report and implementing the process improvements. And so they oversee our work and kind of are a sounding board. And they gave us blessing to fast track this particular item to come to the Planning Commission. Point 2 today of what we're requesting you to do is to consider amending Title 22 to reduce the total number of SFDB appeal points, and specifically to address the appeal of final approval. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 2 appeal, or in SFDB design review, there are 2 appeal points. There's project design approval, which is kind of setting the mass, bulk, and the scale. And then there's final approval, and that's really just the details. And once you get to final approval, everything at that point really needs to substantially, the decision is that, does this substantially conform to what was approved at project design approval? But if you're a single-family homeowner and you have to come to Planning Commission to get your coastal development permit, you could actually have 3 appeal points. You could have the land use approval, you could have PDA and final approval, and we just think that that's, first of all, the Novak report already identified this as a streamlining effort. We don't need 2 design review appeal points. It delays building permit application submittal because an applicant cannot submit their building permit application until their final approval is ratified. So often you get your approval, but then as you all approve your minutes every week, they're minutes from the previous time, so that pushes things back. It messes with the public. They don't know when to appeal, what do these appeals mean. And then, as I was saying, appeals are really staff intensive, so could we just help our staff out in trying to reduce those numbers when, especially if there's not going to be much impact? And then we just generally think that one design review appeal is sufficient for single-family development. I mean, that's simply stated. And then why are we not requesting to fast track this? I'm asking for your comments on this, but I haven't, there are no specific code amendments that have been proposed because this really requires a little bit more internal communication, a look at how our process works and how we route things and kind of when things come in. So just as a follow-up, what is our next steps throughout this whole process improvement effort? We are going to be looking at the problem areas and proposing different things, and we're continuing to work with the AIA, continuing to work with our SFDB to talk about how different ways that ideas that they might have. I'm here today because of course, I'm fast-tracking this specific appeal point. And then we'll also be going back to the Land Development Team Oversight Subcommittee to refine our proposal to reduce those SFDB design review triggers and expand administrative approvals. So again, I have this slide here. I don't need to read it, but again, it's just to reiterate that I'm specifically looking for a Planning Commission's recommendation to reroute appeals, SFDB appeals, to the Planning Commission instead of City Council, and just kind of determine that this project is categorically exempt from further environmental review. And then simply provide comments on the second piece of that, which is reducing the number of appeal points. And I do have some questions here just to kind of guide the conversation, but thank you so much for listening. I'm really excited about this effort and look forward to hearing your comments.
Thank you, Ms. Kukinda. I want to just say that it's very enjoyable listening to you present because you're giving us so much information, but you're doing it in such a personable way. It makes it really easy to follow, and it's a treat to hear you present. Thank you for your time on this. So now I'm going to go ahead and open this up for public comment. Ms. Esparza, do we have any comments from the members of the public pertaining to this specific item?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. We do not have any virtual participants. If anyone in the room would like to speak on this item, please fill out a speaker slip. I do have one speaker slip already for Fred Sweeney. Mr. Sweeney, if you'd like to come up to the dais, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Welcome, Mr. Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chair and council or commission members. Some of you may not know me. I'm a retired architect, but not quite for the moment. But I served for 10 years on the Single Family Design Board and 6 as chair, so I have a little bit of experience, and I could probably talk for several hours on this entire subject, but I wanted to be here today to support Ms. Kukinda's report. It's excellent. It covered all the points. It didn't get down into some of the weeds that one would have to get into to really resolve a lot of this, but I support everything that she's put on the table. We've spent some time together going over this. This is really important if we're going to have a design review forward for residential structures in this city, which I think is the desire of everyone, then we need to find a way to make this work. I've got 6 points. All I'm going to do is just title them. I won't talk about them. I think there needs to be discussion on how minutes are kept. There are some things that need to go from guidelines to ordinance so that it's more specific, such as decks. Remind to you, if you do in fact then move this to a position where it comes before you, just to remind you that mass, bulk, and scale are 3 different things. And you'll hear people continually put those 3 together in a sentence. That's not the correct way to look at it. Enforcement. There is a real issue in enforcement. We have a very diligent building department that looks out for health and safety. That's why architects are licensed for health and safety, not design. But unfortunately, we don't have an enforcement issue set up to deal with what the aesthetic issues are of this review board. Neighborhood compatibility is continually going to be a big subjective issue, and it needs more guidance and maybe perhaps in the form of an ordinance. And there should be no final appeal process. It doesn't make any sense. That doesn't work with how buildings are built and how architects and others prepare documents. The most important element is that project design development, and in fact, I would encourage that for all 3 review boards. So with that, thank you. I'm here if you have questions. As I've been at it a long time, I've filed memo after memo for several years, but we're finally here and taking care of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney, and it's nice to know that you've been through so much with this and that you're here to see hopefully where it ends up. Your comments were very valuable. I have Commissioner Wiscombe to make a comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Sweeney, I just wanted to ask you, you said no final appeal process. Does that mean that when it comes back to SFBD for final approval, that's not when you appeal it? When do you recommend that, if we narrow it down to one appeal period, what is it?
Then it's the project design approval.
It's
Yeah,
PD.
all you're doing at final review by any of the three review boards is supposedly you're supposed to, within 15 minutes, look at a big set of drawings and determine whether or not they look like a real set of drawings, okay? Now, architects that have training can kind of do that, but technically from our licensing, we're in trouble. We're not supposed to be certifying that a project is, those drawings are correct. That's what the building department does. So a final approval at that point is superfluous.
So you're saying at project design approval
Exactly.
is exactly when someone should come in and appeal the project?
Exactly. That's when style is determined. That's when theoretically, and that's why the minutes are so important, why the board approved it from a compatibility, neighborhood compatibility finding, all the findings they have to make. And the materials are set. All of the things, the way the house is going to look is set. All final drawings do is get the details in there.
So are you saying, I'm just in the weeds a little bit since Ms.
Okay.
Kokinda wants the answers to this. So you set a schedule at SFBD for PDA, project design approval?
Yes.
Right? And so if there is an appellant, they should come forward before that meeting?
They should come forward before that meeting to look at the documents, which are generally posted online.
Right.
A lot of people don't know how to do that, so sometimes that's difficult. And then the board should take care to make sure that people do attend, when they do attend, that they are showing them all of these points that they have to make findings for project design approval. And that's the job of the chair of the board and the members of the board to allow the public to understand what's going on. My experience over the years is, as pointed out by Ms. Kokinda, is they don't really understand it. They think it's a planning commission, and it's mostly emotional. It's a very, I mean, I was in meetings where we had to kick people out. You know, it's just, it's a different ballgame.
So you are saying that the project design approval meeting should take place with any potential appellants being fully aware of what's going to be presented, so they have review of everything, and then if the SFBD gives project design approval, then the appellant can come forward and say, I'm filing the appeal to the Planning Commission.
Correct. And remember,
Okay.
it's either party. It's the applicant can file an appeal, or the community can file an appeal.
Right, okay. Okay, so I think that's, and then are you also, the first point you made was about minutes. Sorry, I might as well just go through
Yes.
this. I think most of us understand enforcement. I certainly do. So under minutes, are you recommending that they be more thorough?
Correct.
Okay.
They need to really tell the story of why the board is voting the way they are in detail, not just the list that's handed to them that says it's compatible because it has the right materials. They need to say why it's compatible, that they looked at the neighborhood, that they described the neighborhood, and that they defined the neighborhood. Part of the issue that is a little different than EPV and even ABR is there is no definition for what the neighborhood is. Is it the street? Is it the 50 closest houses?
Right.
Is it the 20 closest houses? Right now, the board, my experience was a lot of board members had a very difficult time with that. There's been periods where they just didn't do it, didn't get into the minutes. There's been appeals based on, in fact, the last couple of appeals that I've watched, the neighbors who were the appellants made the appeal were defining their neighborhood in a certain way, way different than what the applicant thought the neighborhood was. And because it wasn't in the minutes by the SFDB, then the city council had to sit there and deal with this political football of what is the neighborhood. So we really need to look at taking the minutes differently at SFDB than you would if it was a city council meeting or even your meeting, where there is an accepted procedure for taking minutes. We need to be more definitive.
Okay, thank you for that. Madam Chair, when you close public comment, I have some more questions that I'd like to just go on with after you're done.
If
Yeah.
it's for this public comment, are you?
No, I'm
Okay.
through with that,
Oh,
but
yeah, you'll have plenty of time.
Yeah,
give you
but
more
I'd
time.
just like to continue on
Yes,
with my
thank you.
questions. Thank you.
And before I move on, I also just wanted to do a quick follow-up with staff. Correct me if I'm wrong, I am the liaison to ABR, and if I remember correctly, not always, but sometimes we do have point-by-point comments made by different board members really going into their responses. So is that something that we already have sort of a setup with in other design boards that we could use as a starting point for this?
So Chair Bonderson, to respond to that, you might see minutes that are slightly different based on what a project's coming in for. For concept review, before a project is deemed complete, before we can schedule it for project design approval, again, which kind of solidifies the mass, the bulk, the scale, they're getting comments just kind of, it's like a laundry list. And it almost doesn't, it's just individual board members responding to their thoughts and their thinking and kind of their reactions to it, trying to get a consensus, like how close are we, or is this a supportable project? Are they getting close to the findings? So you might see minutes like that. For project design approval, I wholeheartedly agree with Mr. Sweeney in that it's problematic for there to just be rote findings, just to simply hear the findings. I constantly have to ask all of our design, please be specific. We need to understand how you can make this finding and to kind of really fill that out, because without that, all we really have to rely on to bring to city council historically is just the set of findings and here in the appellant letter and the minutes. So the minutes are important, that if the minutes don't capture, if the motion in the minutes doesn't really explain the thinking and how they're able to make findings or approve a project or approve with conditions or deny it, then it's not really a helpful communication tool for you, for any larger review authority. So that's really kind of the spirit of those minutes. They're captured differently when it's a finding versus concept review or other things.
Thank you. Back to you, Mrs. Sparza. Do you have any other public commenters?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. I do not have any virtual participants, and we did not receive any more speaker slips. So with that, I'll close public comment, give it back to the commission. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you as well. So now I'm going to turn to my fellow commissioners for questions. I have Commissioner Wiscombe first. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a couple questions. I want to thank you, Mr. Sweeney. I think it was really helpful for you to be here. You have so much experience on that board, and I want to say thank you for all the years you've served on it. So how much reduction in delay in a project do you think there would be going to PC rather than city council? I know you can't answer it specifically, it depends upon our schedule, but we're talking a significant reduction in delay?
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Yes, I think that it would be a significant delay. I know that working with Ms. DeBusk, that your time, the ability to get on your agenda, the Planning Commission agenda, is much easier than City Council. And again, as I mentioned, it takes the step out of scheduling, going to City Council just to set a date to then later on have a hearing. So we don't have to go through that two-step process necessarily. And so I don't have an exact time for you, but the considerations for time are drafting a staff report, as well as a mailed notice, because that would be part of the appeal process, that there's a mailed notice requirement. So, and generally, the staff report takes the longest, and so we need to get the appellant letter, or, you know, as soon as an appellant letter comes in, we look at that, we meet, we try to draft that. When you're, from a staffing standpoint, after the moment that you're done with a hearing, it's still fresh in your mind. So my goal with staff would be to try to get that report done as soon as possible, respond to the issues, and then let applicants, appellants get on their way. You know, either way, people want a decision made. And so I think it just, the streamlining aspect of it, although I can't be specific, I think will have major benefits.
Chair Bonderson, Commissioner Wisco, could I elaborate? I think it'd be helpful if you understood the process of how it normally works. Sorry, it's on, it's just not
You're
close
on.
enough. So when we get it, the clerk's office receives the appeal. The clerk's office contacts staff internally after reviewing the agendas and the agenda setter and deciding what days are available for the appeal, and then the staff gets back with them, and they're generally looking, because of our internal process, to get even a CAR reviewed. It takes 3 weeks through the process, so they're looking at least that much out. Usually, we're looking 2 months out, 3 months out, sometimes 4, to coordinate, and then they coordinate the schedules with the applicant to try and meet our schedules as well, which takes time. But within that, they have 21 days to get in front of council to set the date for the appeal, where council then agrees to the date that we've all decided on. Then from there, that date is set, and then we're working internally in advance to get with 3 weeks, at least 3 weeks prior to that council date for the hearing, to get our council agenda report drafted and everything done. Then the council agenda report is posted, and that's usually, as you know, a week before, and occasionally that causes, because the applicant and the appellant may not have seen our report, that causes people to respond to that report, in which time, is it similar to what you see, then an applicant or appellant will send additional information, and it's just, occasionally in a hearing might need to be continued because the information that's submitted is so significant that it takes additional time. So that's the middle of the, removing that step of having to go to to the commission, to council to actually set that date is critical. I mean, it's only 21 days, but it's 21 days that we wouldn't need to have.
Right, okay, thank you, Ms. Ostringer, I appreciate that. And so, and this isn't a de novo hearing, I want to ask some questions about that, because you have this, you have this drafted that the Planning Commission would have limits on new evidence, which is different from appeals to City Council, where most of them are de novo hearings. And so I guess my question on that is, if someone steps forward as an appellant and files an appeal, and hopefully the applicant and the appellant can work together, and so maybe there's some sort of compromise, but not enough to cancel the appeal. So does that mean we would have to vote on any new evidence that is presented in a compromise or that's come forward?
Chair Bodderson, Commissioner Wiscombe, just to be clear, ABR, SFDB, and HLC appeals to council, they do not allow new evidence. It's only Planning Commission appeals that we allow new evidence in.
Okay.
So the way it works is if it would be photographs, for example, photographs that weren't presented to the single-family design board that someone wants to present at the hearing, because I think they'd be helpful. That would be something that whoever was bringing that forward would ask the Planning Commission if they would allow it, and if the reasons being is it wasn't available at the time of the hearing, or there's some significant reason where they'd be substantially prejudiced for not being able to bring it in. we've limited the new evidence because we felt it was unfair for the board that's considering the appeal to not have, to have to take in that new information when the experts, the Single Family Design Board, the ABR, didn't get that opportunity.
Right.
And their decision may have been different based on that.
Okay, so if the applicant, when the appeal is filed, if the applicant says, gee, I offered to reduce my deck to an 8-foot depth as opposed to a 10-foot depth, but that wasn't satisfactory, could that evidence be presented at a planning commission hearing but we'd have to vote on it first?
Chair Wiscombe, that would be argument, and I can help you in the hearings, guide you through that.
Okay.
So arguments that are appropriate, it's just that physical evidence that.
Okay,
that
I
didn't get
don't want to get in the weeds on it, but I just wanted to try to understand that, okay. And then my other question relates to, okay, so the project goes to the SFDB, and then they have their hearings, and then if it's in the coastal zone, they send it to the planning commission for a coastal development permit. Okay, so it comes to the planning commission, we grant the coastal development permit, then it goes back to the Single Family Design Board, and if they deny the project, then it's going to come back to us on appeal by the applicant, and even though we've approved that, so I know we have to wear two different hats, land use hat versus design hat, but that's what you're asking us to do, right?
Chair Bonderson, Commissioner Wiscombe, and yes, and one of the things, I'm glad you caught that because we as staff had thought about that internally. What does that look like? One of the things when you're granting a CDP, you're kind of looking at like the neighborhood area. So that gives, I think, a trigger to the Single Family Design Board of what the board that would take it up on appeal it feels about it. Maybe it would sway their decision, maybe it wouldn't. When it comes to you, you had that initial knowledge, but you're certainly not bound by it. You could certainly uphold the appeal if it was to deny or.
Okay, I know we sometimes go down the slippery slope of design, which we're not supposed to do, so but
Commissioner, Chair Bonderson and Commissioner Wiscombe and to the commission, one thing, and I don't know if I pointed this out or if I just want to also clarify that the intention for the appeal is that the planning commission decision on the appeal would be a final action of the city with exception to judicial review. So meaning that an applicant or appellant would exhaust the appeal by the time, whatever decision that the planning commission would make would be the final decision of the city, and it would have to be in a separate arena, that it couldn't be appealed again to city council.
correct, yes, no, I think we understand that, yeah, okay, thank you for that, and Madam Chair, that's all the questions I have, thank you.
Of course, thank you. Next, we have Vice Chair Bauke, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Kokenda, I've got a number of questions. And first off, very, very good presentation as somebody that went through the single-family design review process and did not have a good experience. You definitely identified some very good key points, and the question of neighborhood compatibility and what the neighborhood is a very interesting and seems historically be somewhat fluid. I mean, I had an application in around 2007 when they were brand new, and I think they were testing out what their definitions were at the time. One of the concerns I have is using FAR in a conversation of neighborhood compatibility. I find that to be one of the areas that I ran into that was, my house was going to be bigger than most of my neighbors. My lot was 3 times bigger, and there was 2 houses that were much, much bigger in our neighborhood, but they sort of wanted to go through this blending process and say, oh, well, most of your neighborhood's like 3,000 square feet, and you want to do 4,000. You can't do that because you're bigger than the rest, even though the lot's 3 times bigger. So the whole discussion of neighborhood and FAR and compatibility is something I think is a very sticky process, and equity should be part of that conversation. So I just wanted to touch on that because I think that's one of the reasons why you have, some of these things are very contentious, because somebody's coming in thinking they have a right to do something and then told, well, you don't have a right. We're being totally subjective as to what it is, because, you know, and then there's politics involved. And I understand the appeals going to the city council become very political. And, you know, it's like who you know and things like that. And that's, you shouldn't go there anyway. So it's good that what you're proposing gets out of the political system, honestly. The question I have is how this may potentially relate, or long-term we may use the objective design standards that are being formulated for not single-family homes, but using that concept and process to at least put sort of a overall blanket on what the boundaries of the review is. You know, I mean, the single-family design review process right now doesn't have very, very tight guidelines or standards and objectives, executive standards. So would part of the conversation here, instead of just, like some cities don't have single-family review. In fact, actually, most cities don't have single-family reviews. That's the one thing that's exempted out. That's sort of just left to the applicants. So I understand Santa Barbara, we have it, and there's a good reason for it. But my concern is there's a lack of clarity as to what the limitations and what the stylistic varieties and things like that are. And you mentioned a lot of those in your report as to, you know, the neighbors all think it should be all Victorian or something, and somebody comes in with something else. But one of the conversations we have had with the Objective Design Standards Working Group is sort of what are the types that are appropriate for a particular neighborhood. And I use neighborhoods more broadly probably than like the nearest 20 homes. It's like, you know, are you in the Riviera? That's a neighborhood. Are you in Eucalyptus Hill? That's a neighborhood. The Mesa is a neighborhood, a more global type of definition of a neighborhood. So what's your thoughts about using the work product that we have for the objective design standards and bringing them into the single-family review process? That's pretty much a big question. Then I have some for the city attorney about the process.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bauke. So a couple of things. I do want to just point out, and maybe not so much for you because you're familiar, but for anyone watching, that the objective design standards process for multi-unit housing is a very separate track to try to come up with and streamline multi-unit housing, mixed-use development. Again, that has residential units attached to it. The single-family, this SFDB process improvement is a separate track, but I think that from our AIA design community, I think they get a little bit it's difficult because as much as people want clear direction, it's also hard to design within objective standards. They're really difficult to write. It means that if I don't meet this, does this mean, how does this affect an overall quality of a design? And generally that's not how an architect starts their process when they're thinking about, you know, starting with the blank page. So I think that we don't, I'm not trying to be, I'm trying to set clear intentions for what this is, and a lot of that has to do with really supporting the diversity of architectural style within our single-family neighborhoods. That's a huge, you know, that was the intention when this started, and not to mandate a particular style. I know that if we started to get into the world of mandating style in different neighborhoods, I don't really know if that's what our community has an appetite for. You know, certainly there is more objectivity when it comes to staff approvals, where I think we have a lot more room to play with. And what that means, those tend to be consent level projects. These are small projects. They don't go to the full board. But right now, for example, we have a design review trigger that if you're in the Hillside Design District and your lot is average 20% slope, any alteration to your home triggers design review. So if you're trying to put in new windows, if you're trying to do a re-roof, if you're trying to just do basic update, it's, if you're proposing something that's not within our guidelines that were updated in 2011, we don't have a lot of building materials that are, what we might see today. So staff feel really constrained by the objective standards that are currently in place. So we're just looking to expand those. And again, maybe we can take off some of those projects that aren't subject to a public hearing and that do help homeowners just move through the process a little quicker, that don't necessarily need, that could submit just straight to building permit application, that we could say, wow, okay, yes, we'll allow you to do this aluminum frame window, or this, this particular window that, meets different energy efficiency standards, or something like that, where objectivity can come into play. But from a larger standpoint, I know that other cities do have objective standards, and to a certain extent, the city of Santa Barbara has, our municipal code is an objective design standard, because we say single-family homes can be 30 feet tall. But if you ask anybody, are you comfortable with a 30-foot tall house? Like, a lot of Santa Barbarans will shudder at that objective design standard. So I think that's where the beauty of discretion can come into play, and where SFDB is a really helpful tool to try to mitigate some of those privacy impacts and different things without being too prescriptive. So we're still looking for design excellence. We're still looking for a value-added process. And we can still work on objective standards to try to, again, get rid of some of the small things that don't have major neighborhood impacts or neighbor issues, so that we're not being too onerous and that we can reduce our volume of projects. But I do want to kind of keep the conversations of multi-unit and coming up with just one design standard, because that would be a massive work effort, and that's not really the intention of this effort.
Okay. Well, thank you for your response. Got a couple questions for the city attorney's office. As Commissioner Wiscombe brought up, we're going to be not operating in a de novo review. We're going to be stuck with basically what's been discussed and the evidence that was at the Single Family Review Board, correct? I just want to make sure, because that's sort of the things I noticed watching one of the council appeals. They went through this whole thing about new evidence and whether that was disseminated it got very muddy, and I was just wondering what the thought process of why wouldn't we want to just be a de novo review versus not being such? I mean, could you give us the pros and cons of that?
Yes, Chair Bonderson, Commissioner Bauke. So, yes, you would be limited to the evidence that was presented to Single Family Design Board. The thinking when we did that, because that hadn't always been the case. It's in a recent, what we thought was a process improvement about a year and a half ago. It was because we were getting all this new information, or council was getting all this new information that the lower boards hadn't been able to consider, and was struggling with the fact, well, if our experts had seen it, would it have made this difference that either the applicant or the appellant, whoever was the presenter of the new evidence, would it have made the significant difference that this person says it would be, such that it would support approval or a denial of the project? So we felt that to make the project simpler, it was better just to say, okay, to all public, if you want to have your say, including members of the public, present your evidence through public comment, public submitted through emails, testimony. That way it's in the record, and the decision-making body, the lower decision-making body, has the opportunity to hear it and consider it at that time. So all the evidence is there. As you mentioned in watching the council meetings, it hasn't necessarily gone as smoothly, and council has struggled with that of what, should we let it in, shouldn't we, how do we do this process? We've tried to improve that in these new ordinances with, where you take a vote, because that hadn't been clear to council. We didn't set that forth on how they made the decision of whether they would let it in. But I would appreciate your feedback on whether you think that's a good idea to limit the evidence to what the lower decision-making body heard, or if you don't think that's a good idea.
And
Okay, I'll give you my, even though we're in questions, I think the issue becomes one that the neighbors usually are late to the game of understanding where you are in the process. At least that's my experience, that people find out, oh, well, the word gets out like almost after the fact or almost after the fact, and they're scrambling and they don't really have their act together. I don't know how you, maybe as staff, you have some suggestions of how you clearly articulate getting that information and they present earlier in the process. So, do you have any comments on that?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Bauke. I want to follow up on Ms. Ostringer's comments that it's not just, this idea, like we want people to participate in public comment, but it's also recognizing that, as I mentioned, the average was 8 months' time. So when you're talking about the really controversial projects for over a year, that they've had a year and a half to present anything they wish to submit to public comment. So we have to, I think it's really, we ask applicants to submit all of these materials, meet the municipal code, go through our process, get your planning approvals, get your land use approvals if required, go to concept review, get project design approval, and then it just seems really challenging to bring up information at the 9th hour. And I will say that the 99% of the time, staff aren't verifying this information. It's very different from a planning commission if you get a new report that comes to you, what staff are looking at, they're responding to, but this is very different, that they might come in with new materials that SFDB didn't have a chance to review, and that frankly, staff don't vet. But we are required to vet every single applicant project to make sure that it meets all codes and standards, and that, again, that we're taking that through. One thing about the one process improvement that has helped immensely with getting people to participate at the right time, which is what we were talking about with Mr. Sweeney, which is we want people to make sure that they get their comments in as early as possible. If there's a one-time pre-application, this is a pre-application, we do a mailed notice with that if it triggers mailed notice. We want people to participate at concept review as much as possible. But if project design approval is the first and only time, we changed our process to send out mailed notices at project design approval. And we used to just do it at that first public hearing for concept. But since we've been sending out mailed notices at project design approval for that meeting, it means that people are coming in at the right time, because what we used to see is more appeals of final approval. And I haven't had one of those, thankfully. And again, the ship has sailed if someone's starting to appeal final approval. So that's one thing that's already been in place, and we've already seen, I would say, the fact that we haven't seen final approvals appealed, that tells me something's working there. But again, going back to your point and some of the things that I was mentioning, there are other ways that we can communicate what's what and how to participate. And again, what is the SFDB's purview? They're not looking at parking. If you have an issue, here are the things that you should really point out. Here's how guidelines work. Let's look through the guidelines. Do you have, just creating communication tools that speak to the things that people are most concerned about so that they can input that's most helpful for the SFDB to actually respond to.
And before you go on, Ms. Kokenda, could you also just add, for the record, when does the placard go up? So that's another signal to the community that something's happening on that property.
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. So anytime a project triggers a mailed notice, our administrative staff within the planning division prepare we have a radius of 300 feet for mailed noticing. And we also require the yellow signs, the yellow development signs. So if there is that approval, they're supposed to have that in their front yard it's all within the municipal code of how long they have to have it up and how many days in advance of the hearing. It's just a helpful tool for neighbors to see.
I've completed my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner DeLuccio, please.
I've been patiently listening. I had similar questions as everybody else had. I'm all about streamlining. I'm actually, the city I came from, I was on the planning commission for more years than Mr. Sweeney was on the single-family design review board. Actually, there was no design review boards in the city of West Hollywood. It was all done at the planning commission level. So my question becomes, I think you alluded to it, by everything coming to the planning commission after including the design, that's when we can discuss things like is parking issues and other issues beyond design when you package it all together. So I'm assuming that staff is taking that role to help these projects and the neighbors' concerns over them for issues not related to specifically to the design.
Thank you, Commissioner DeLuccio. So yes, we're a little bit of a broken record at all of our design review boards, not just single-family design board, where we have to, we remind the board what their purview is, and it's not so much for the board, it's really more for members of the public to say, if a chair doesn't explain what the purview is, because again, SFDB is the hardest design review board to serve on. Because, again, the lack of experience of neighbors and neighborhoods in the city's processes, the fact that you don't necessarily have a professional at the helm as an applicant, there's just a lot of tension about what's going to happen. And so we often staff reiterate to members of the public, and I try to respond every time after public comment, because it just is a helpful reminder, and to do it for almost, all of these projects that are controversial, it's just part of the due diligence process and communications that we do.
And if some of the appeals do come to the planning commission, will there be the same noticing requirement?
Yes, Commissioner DeLuccio, yes, there will be a mailed notice for all appeals. And again, when we present appeals, we go through the history of the project and what's changed, how the single-family design board commented on it, how the applicant responded to those comments, what the findings were. Again, that goes back to why it's so critical to have good motions that really spell out how they got there, so it's a communication tool for you. And then we also, we haven't always necessarily taken a position. Historically, staff have just been the presenters, but perhaps in the future that might change, or there could be certain instances where we take a position.
So I see it's struck out here under section 2B, notice of appeal, and I know this is a mock-up of what from the council had, and you're applying it now to the planning commission, and it says notice of appeal, and all that's been taken out. So I was just curious. I didn't see anything about noticing the appeal if it came to the planning commission.
Commissioner DeLuccio, could you just call out the page number?
Yeah, it's
for
on
the record?
page 2. It's section 2A, number B, notice of appeal, and all that was taken out. So I don't see anything about noticing.
Ms. Ostringer, why don't you respond, please?
Yes. Chair Bonderson, Commissioner DeLuccio. On page 2, subdivision A, the reason that's struck out is because it refers to Chapter 130, and that is specific noticing that requires the clerk to get
Yeah.
permission from the city council to set the hearing date. So then it comes down and it says, There's a section later on where it references, I have to find it. It says under the provisions of subdivision B, subsection 3, 30.205.150, and that pulls you back into planning commission appeals and says, so this one is subject to the same noticing requirements and appeals that the planning commission is subject to.
Okay, so it's in here, under there.
Yes.
It's kind of hard to find it.
Yeah, you'd have to know
Yeah.
to look back and reference. to
The other
Title
question
30.
is, as far as appeals go, have any appeals been for example, a permit that's coming for this commission, like a coastal development permit? 'Cause the reason I'm asking is if there's an appeal for that, obviously, that would still go to the city council, correct?
Commissioner DeLucio, not recently. There are some that were in the coastal zone, but that did not trigger planning commission review, or planning commission review and approval.
Got it. But if it did have come before this body and it was a permit that we approved or did not approve, that would go to city council, correct?
Chair Bonderson and Commissioner
Yeah.
DeLucia, that's correct. If you approve whatever the permit, most typically it's going to be a coastal development permit.
Yeah.
But if you approve that and that approval's appealed, it will still go to city council.
But the design component could still come here.
Correct. So the design component comes after the planning commission's approval. Your approval is first. If that's appealed, it goes to council. Then it goes to design review for project design approval. If that's appealed, it would come to the planning
And then
commission.
that's what we were circling back now, which the first question that was asked about, okay, if something comes here, and we heard would be obviously a coastal permit, probably development permit, and then we make a decision on that, and then if somebody appeals the design portion of it and it comes back to us, is that almost in my mind, is that a conflict of interest? And would that be something that maybe should go to the city council? I'm just throwing that out. That's my thought on that. I don't,
Commissioner DeLucia, let me just think about how that would work for a minute, because it's a good question. So theoretically, if this body granted the conditional, the CDP, and that approval was appealed to the city council, and city council then decided to reverse your decision, the project would be dead, so it wouldn't come forward. Again, it wouldn't go past design review, so it would stop there. If the city council, if you were to approve the CDP and it was went before council and they agreed with your decision, it would then go back to the ABR, your decision would be upheld. And
Family.
SFDB, yes, SFDB, and then they would make their decision. If that decision was appealed, then it would come before you. So I don't see any conflict.
It's a different.
even though we heard it the first time.
Correct, because you heard it on a different matter. You heard it on a land use
So we would have to
decision.
focus on the design when it came back to us.
Correct.
And
Yes.
possibly, if, according to this, we could look at new evidence, if we went forward with this ordinance, and the council went along with it, it could be that if we had enough votes on the commission, we could look at some new evidence.
Correct. If you had the appeal, the single-family design board's decision was appealed to this board, and you decided as a body to vote to hear new evidence on the aesthetics of whatever that evidence was.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm thinking it through too also, and thank you for bearing with me on this. And this is very helpful that you went through that whole process
And-
to make me feel more comfortable with, because again, I'm very much about streamlining, and so thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner DeLucio. And Ms. Ostringer, just to be really clear, since you gave us an example, and I want to make sure that it made sense to everybody, at least for me, you're saying that if it does come back to the Planning Commission, it would come back for a completely different reason. And that's why we would be looking at it for a completely different area. We wouldn't be looking at it for the same reason again. Is that correct?
Chair Bonderson, that's correct. Your purview would be limited to the aesthetics, the same as the single-family design board.
Yeah, just
And-
to be clear.
Chair Bonderson, if I may add to that, is that the specific findings that are required of the single-family design board that would then be asked of you to make are the neighborhood compatibility findings as part of the neighborhood preservation ordinance. So there are specific findings, and it's just kind of keeping, that's the purview and kind of not expanding beyond. Again, appellants tend to write anything and everything in their appeal letters, and we try to address those of, this isn't in your purview,
Right.
but this is.
That's very, very helpful. I'm glad we kind of got that out to discuss. Thank you, Ms. Kokenda. Thank you, Ms. Ostringer. Are you complete, Commissioner DeLuccio? Yes, thank you. Very good. Next, we have Commissioner Wardlow, please.
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. Thank you so much for this presentation. This was really informative, and I feel like I've learned a lot. It is a little concerning. I just wanted to confirm that you're saying that on average it takes 8 months to get through just this design review board, plus an average of $50,000 more in costs. Is that kind of that was a slide that was up a little while ago?
So thank you, Commissioner Wardlow. So the 8 months is just in, so this is all projects, SFDB projects that are subject to public hearing. So those are both consent and full board. Again, not apples to apples, but on average, if we just take the aggregate of 3 years' worth of data that we heard from applicants that it took 8 months. There's multiple considerations for how things operate. When an applicant submits something, staff, through Permit Streamlining Act requirements, we have 30 days to get back to identify if a project is complete, if we have complete information. If not, we have to identify all the things that are incomplete about that process. So then we submit that letter to the applicant, and the time it takes for the applicant to respond really varies. It's all over the place. Ideally, get something back to us a couple weeks and then resubmit. We have another 30 days to review. Again, for minor projects, we really want to try to tighten that up so that we're not going through this whole back and forth that takes so long. So 8 months was just, again, for what it's worth, this was what respondents said. It was the average that time that respondents said based on their the latest project.
Thank you. And so understanding that one of the things that you want us to kind of consider is how can we streamline this process, how can we empower staff? So out of the projects, and I apologize if this is a silly question, but I do really want to understand this. So out of the projects that do have hearings and are seen by this board, in your opinion as staff, how many of those, like a percentage, are warranted to go through a full hearing versus if we were to be able to empower staff to make, administrative decisions on those projects?
So, Commissioner Wardlow, good question. This is not based on anything, but if I could reduce the number of projects that require a public hearing at SFDB, I'd like to do so by 50%. And that sounds massive, but I just want to put this into perspective that I did our, every quarter, we have to look at all the numbers. Of SFDB had twice as many projects go to public hearing as ABR and HLC. And so, again, why I need 2 staff people to manage this for having, it used to be 1 staff person, but we burn them out. And I want to keep really good staff in the city, and I want to take care of my staff. So I had to break it up into 2, and I just don't think that all of that time and oversight and review, why are we doing that to single-family homeowners when we know that there are other city priorities that I would argue I'd rather use staff time for, even if it's not for my dear section of design review. I'd maybe help Allison or Ms. DeBusk out with more development review or something. But so I say 50% because if I could just get it down to a level of how ABR and HLC are operating, that would make me feel great.
So, but understanding that the increase in the amount of these projects that we're seeing is probably not going to decrease, right? The desire of homeowners to build or expand or whatever is just going to grow and grow and grow, given how expensive it is to live here. If we're going to just keep getting more projects, and we have this forum that most cities don't have, and I obviously love the way Santa Barbara has developed, and I would attribute a lot of that to this board because of the oversight that we've had, but given that the dynamics are changing and we're going to continue to get more and more of these projects, you know, I guess I'm just asking, like, as staff and as, like, trying to improve streamlining and seeing how much cost this is to homeowners, you know, does this really make sense if 50% of the projects they're seeing doesn't make sense for them?
Thank you,
And now
Commissioner
we're
Wardlow.
taking on another piece here at this level. I just want to kind of understand, are we making too many steps if we're now, this body that reviewed the project originally is coming back to review just design? Is there just a way to make this easier? Because this seems like a lot of work if you're saying 50% of them shouldn't even be there.
And thank you, Commissioner Wardlow. So let me clarify a little bit more. I think where we can, we have to look at each level of design review. So there are 3 levels of design review. There's full board, there's consent for minor projects, and then administrative staff review. Some things that that currently are staff review, maybe they don't trigger design review at all. So they just go straight to building permit. We don't even have to think about those because we always approve them. You know, there are already objective standards in the code, so that just removes a number of projects. And then we look at, I've already had to do this because having lost quorum multiple times at SFDB and canceling hearings meant that I had a backlog of development projects. So things that used to be full board projects, I started sending to consent because I just didn't have any other option, and I couldn't do that to applicants who are waiting and who are getting stuck in this process. So I would take some of those projects and move them to the consent level. Consent meetings happen every single week, so I can get those off. Generally those move a lot faster. If again, they tend to be minor, but we might still want to have a little bit of oversight over them. And then some things that are currently on consent, we can expand our objective criteria so that staff can look at them, say, okay, this still has quality materials, quality, kind of fits in with architect, again, have to craft objectively, but looking at different ways that we can just reduce those projects so that that's expanding our admin approvals. So that takes the number of projects that would trigger a public hearing down even further. And then because there was so much community effort from 1992 to 2007, and when the SFDB was created, I still believe that there is a community interest in having a public forum for single-family residences. So let the full board just be for the projects that tend to have the biggest privacy impacts, that tend to have the biggest neighborhood impacts. So I think that I don't necessarily think we're going to see a huge number of those, but I think the type of development that we're seeing are the things that trigger that issue. They already triggered them, so it's kind of a, I don't necessarily think, like, it already would have, the current triggers of today will still apply to these, so I don't necessarily think it'll be a massive increase for those full board projects. It just means that we're still creating a public forum for people, and that's, some people would rather not have that at all, and I recognize that.
Okay, one more question. So I appreciate the importance of having community input on these projects. I do think it's really important that as we as a city are facing this horrendous problem with our housing market, that we do everything we can to reduce the costs of producing housing or expanding housing or whatever. And this seems like a very expensive and timely kind of cost. As city staff, you mentioned that you think that the public has a big desire in this and you see the benefit to the public. But as staff and as kind of the people that govern and try and make this all work, does it make sense to you?
Thank you. Great question, Commissioner Wardlow. I think what makes the most sense for me is what feels like a fair process. I think that, again, I want to honor the efforts that this community has made. And we started out with the recommendation to eliminate the single-family design board. When I stepped into the design review supervisor role, that is not a position that I wanted to take on. And I was like, okay, let's look at this. Where are we coming from? Where are we going? We already know that there are pathways for people to streamline things and through accessory dwelling units. There's not just I don't want to send a blanket cap of like everything has to have oversight. I think what is currently happening is too onerous. And I had full agreement from every single board member and all, all the respondents. So that was a real energizing thing to see and read. But what I do, where I'm most concerned is that when an applicant goes through our process and gets all the necessary land use approval or design review approval and responds to comments, attempts to address neighborhood concerns, and then something is still appealed, it's really difficult to, you're never going to make anyone happy, and that's the challenge of reviewing appeals. But to what extent an applicant has responded effectively and to taken into consideration the Single-Family Design Board's comments and how well we as staff can help the design review with, making sure that we have strong submittals and so they can have they know what the context of the neighborhood is really clear. And I worry about just the feeling of a homeowner who's gone through this process and feels like they've done everything they could and then still gets burned. And so process is really important, and that's why I wanted to point out just noticing how much time and effort it does take for people to get there, and sometimes that's lost by the time it comes to an appeal hearing or when you see different evidence coming at you or requests for that. I always want to go back to, we've sent these people through this process. How do we feel like they've responded? And have they responded sufficiently? And can we make is this project acceptable? It's not perfect, and it might not make everybody happy, but have we gotten to an acceptable project?
And Commissioner Wardlow, just to add on, from the community standpoint overall, I do think if you look at the projects that we were seeing right before Single-Family Design Board was implemented and the projects that have come after, there's a difference. And I do think that there has been, it's valuable for the community overall. But I think as Ms. Kokinda is saying, we want to make sure it's value added, and so we want to focus on the things that really matter and not drag everything through a process and make the process better for the ones that do have to go through it.
I really appreciate this presentation, and I'm very happy that you are the one leading the charge on this, because you seem very educated and kind of aligned with our hopes of really streamlining, but also doing what's right for the community. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wardlow. I just want to acknowledge Commissioner Lodge and Commissioner Boss. Do either of you have any questions at this time? Okay, well then I'll take my turn.
Madam
Yes.
Chair, the other question, Commissioner Wiscombe and Commissioner Balke asked my questions, so.
Very good. Well, you are lucky. You got them out of the way. So I will take my turn quickly here, and I'm not sure it'll be quick, but we'll see. It's interesting because your answers to certain things have knocked some of my questions off the list, and I'll just tell you, I was taking notes as you were presenting on the slides, and I would get the answers as you continued forward and provided the solutions. I'm really pleased to hear that you are paying close attention to advocating guidelines or support to members of the public who need to have maybe ways to understand the purview of what their comments will lead to, whether they are even something that we as, a board can answer, and I know that we as a planning commission have that happen a lot as well, where we need to really understand our position and where our purview ends. I know I get frustrated with that sometimes. But that being said, I was wondering if, as part of your noticing, if you, staff, could find a way to create some sort of handout, some sort of guidelines that says, here's what you can comment on, here's things that we can't necessarily work on, talk about, appeal on, and provide the handout so that it helps the public understand the areas that they can influence. And also to help focus on property rights versus opinion. I know you touched on that in a slide I believe it was slide 14, and I thought that that was a really good, I can say, quote, property rights versus opinion. And how can we be more effective as a public commenter, as a neighbor, when we come forward? How can staff help the neighbor be the most effective commenter possible? And I'm curious to know if some time could be spent on that, and it could be something that you print as a second sheet and send with the notices. So they look at it, they get infuriated, they're gonna come and they're gonna say what they wanna say. But if they pay attention to how they can perform that, they might be able to reduce some of it themselves and come with better equipped feedback. That was more of a suggestion. It was supposed to be a question. I don't hear my question in there. But in any case, I guess I just deliberated. In other words, it reduces subjectivity and promotes objectivity in the design review from the public. It was a question before, how can we be more effective? But I don't think you need to answer that question. I will go to my second question, and we've heard it touched on by a few commissioners, including the Commissioner Wardlow a moment ago. I'm going to build on it. I'm curious to know if you have possibly looked at our neighboring communities, our agencies like the County of Santa Barbara, for the way that they handle project review and director level or staff level discretionary decision-making, and if that might be something that we could consider to help reduce what comes to the design review boards. I'll give you an example. You said yourself, when a project is hillside, it automatically triggers design review. But if it's coming for, your example, windows, maybe that's something that could be an internal director level or staff level discretionary decision, and it doesn't even have to be agendized. I guess my question here is, does the city currently have that level of discretionary review assigned outside of the board to pull it off of the agenda?
So thank you, Chair Bonderson. So we have, and I'm sorry I didn't bring it today, but it's a yellow binder. It's the Single Family Design Board Guidelines and Meeting Procedures. Just like the Planning Commission has your meeting procedures, so does the Single Family Design Board. And within that, it outlines all of the things that staff can review administratively. When this was crafted, it wasn't crafted with the intent of being 100% objective. So there is subjectivity that staff apply to these administrative approvals. But the fact that the document hasn't really been touched since 2011, there's limitations of, again, there's new building processes, there's new materials that we might see. There are things that we find acceptable that might not have been acceptable at the time, or there's limitations. For instance, it's really onerous to send someone to a design review board for a pool that meets all zoning standards. It's in ground, you can't see it, nothing's, it just is. Sometimes our hands are tied in that we have to send certain things to a public hearing just because they're not written in the yellow binder. And so those are the things, again, there is some level of discretion. The majority of them are objective, but there's, it's a little squishy. So that's something that, again, we would try to build on. And the more objective we can be, the easier it is for people to know, what level of design review might I trigger.
You may have said this, so forgive me if it's a repeat question, but is updating those guidelines part of your staff goal here? I mean, not for our recommendation, but as part of your outline of what you need to do?
Yes, thank you, Chair Bonderson. So that is very much a tool that we can look at to try to see what opportunities we have to modify and to kind of revise, edit. Again, where are we today? Where do we want to go? What is, and again, be able to work with our AIA partners and board members to get feedback on what that could be. So that's one of the things, again, looking at our findings. I don't have a specific recommendation, but again, maybe that's, if there's pathways to make it easier to help the board and planning commission understand what is the, what are we trying to achieve? What's the intention of this process? Then we can look at that as well.
Yes, I mean, based on your response to Commissioner Wardlow, that you're hoping to knock off 50%, I think this would be a very useful way to help you do that, even by not putting it on consent. I mean, they don't even have to go to consent, so I would love to support you on that. My next question is, now I heard you during your presentation say that due to certain uniqueness of this design board, it differs from ABR and HLC, and what's happening here today is not being applied to the others. But I am curious if this effort, once this effort is put into action, and I'm sure there'll be some assessment and evaluation to improve it as it starts being put into practice, and those efforts, we all hope, will be greatly beneficial. If there is any opportunity for those types of improvements to later be applied to the other design review boards?
Chair Bonderson, absolutely. So helping members of the public understand what purview is, creating new materials, having different things to kind of level the playing field, have a little bit more equity in being able to participate in the process will not just serve projects or, people who are interested in SFDB projects. It's going to help serve ABR, HLC, the land use, any kind of staff hearing officer, land use, because we're all connected. And, some projects kind of dip into different worlds. And so I think that's what I wanted to introduce Mr. Hamilton Roll, because he will be able to help create some of those things. And once we create those, again, it's much easier to expand that throughout our planning division.
Thank you, yes. And I might have a different experience level on this topic, since I can take off one hat and put on my practitioner hat. I've submitted to the city. My projects have gone to different design boards, and I understand, how what you were explaining previously, we expect a certain speed from the city to review. 30 days is what you said. And we get scheduled, we go to a design board, and then, or we submit and get plan check corrections, and then all of a sudden, the time it takes is in our, it's our responsibility. And I can tell you, I recently had a project that took just over 12 months for us to be able to do the architectural corrections and get soils reports and other testing that was required. And that was on us. The city did their part, and clearly the applicant, the homeowner was extremely frustrated how slow this is. And they continuously ask me as the planner, the applicant, why is this taking so long? And it's really important for us to create expectations, fair expectations. And I wanted to share that because I think that part of that handout could be to clarify that not everything is the fault of the city's design review process. It's really hard to continuously remind, and so that my next question goes to this. I heard you say that projects, let me see if I wrote down the slide number. I think it's slide 18, but I might be wrong. That projects do not require a licensed architect to be submitted. Did I get that right?
Yes, Chair Bonderson, for single-family residential projects, for this process, you do not have to be a licensed architect to submit.
Okay. I knew that, but I wanted to make sure. Is there room legally, so this might be a Ms. Ostringer question, for the city to recommend or require, there's a difference between the two, for a licensed architect to at least review the drawings and agree that they are that they are, let me say this differently. Would it be useful in the process to get a step that requires a licensed architect to review the final drawings, even though they were done by someone else, stamp and sign them for the sake of public health and safety, and making sure that there's an official step before it comes to you?
So Chair Bonderson, the couple things. I think what we see is the type of applicants who don't hire an architect, they are generally, when they're trying to do it by themselves, it always takes longer. The plans are kind of rough. It's a little bit heartbreaking because, they need extra support. And I don't think we would want to, or I don't even think there'd necessarily be a legal path to do that because of the state's law. But for design review, for the most part, again, you have to, if it's a minor project, what's sufficient? We have to kind of get to the point of what is sufficient to be able to understand, to communicate effectively, that the board can understand what your project is, that neighbors can understand it, if you're just generally and that staff, before we, again, schedule any project for project design approval, we need to be able to understand that it meets all zoning regulations, or else that would potentially alter a design. But I can say this is, in conversations with the AIA, there have been, in our focus group, there was is there a way that we could be supportive of different homeowners? Can we, is there a helping out? I don't want to overpromise anything, but these are kind of conversations that we could have of just volunteer architects, volunteer planners, volunteer, and just being able to provide that little extra bit of support so that people can just maintain their homes. Sometimes it's just, if something comes through enforcement, they need to do something, it's kind of a can of worms, they don't have a lot of money to spend. That's a really unfortunate situation. So I think it's worth to kind of continue that conversation and to see where our community partners might be able to support in certain instances. But that's just a thought that came up.
I appreciate your thought. I mean, you're literally brainstorming while you're sitting here. And the reason I bring it up is because, if you think about, I'll give you an example. If you go to court, they have a free support system where they may not be able to answer all questions because they may get too specific. But if we had some sort of partnership with the community, that we might have an AIA volunteer hotline where they can offer some sort of direction, or a free or reduced final set of eyes on a project before it's being submitted, for no other reason than just to say, hey, you missed a few things. So it speeds up both the applicant's process, but also the city's review. I think it would be really useful. And I say this because I do this in my own work. I get called in for no other reason than just to do a last review on things. And there's a small, estimated price on a couple hours of review that is put into the miscellaneous estimate for a project. And it speeds up the process completely. And I think that should be something that we could make available to applicants, especially those who don't have the money and don't have the experience. They're trying to struggle through this on their own. Now, that's going to take a whole, outreach discussion with your partners, but it may be something worth looking into. My final question has to do with nothing. I got all my questions answered. So I'm happy to say that I believe the question period is finished. But before we I was going to say, I'm going to call on Commissioner Wiscom. Okay, I was going to actually ask, before Commissioner Wiscom jumped the gun, it's 3 o'clock. Do we need a 5-minute break? Should we finish this item? Very good. I just was mindful of the clock. So let's begin the deliberations. Commissioner Wiscom, you're on the lead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank Ms. Kokinda and staff. I think it was, and Ms. Ostringer, I think it was a great presentation and very thorough. I'm very happy to support the amendments so that the SFDB comes to the Planning Commission for appeal rather than to City Council. I think it makes a lot of sense, particularly in light of streamlining projects and streamlining time. Time is money. We see it all the time, and it just reduces it. I would also agree that it should be limited to one appeal time, and that's the project design approval. And I also would like to see Mr. Sweeney's other categories. I think it's imperative if we switch this process from strictly a streamlining point of view, that the minutes from the SFDB become more thorough, as Mr. Sweeney stated, so that we know. And I'll use the example that Ms. Ostringer gave us a while back in terms of findings. We make this finding because and so that kind of language, I think, really helps. And that some of the guidelines perhaps become ordinances. Mr. Sweeney used DEC as an example, so I don't know exactly what the details of that would look like, but and that mass, bulk, and scale, he said, are all different. I think definition of those. And all of these things help the public, too. This is not just for Planning Commission, but it puts us all on the same page on appeals and on consideration of whether a project is going to be appealed or not. Enforcement is another one. Neighborhood compatibility, he said it needs to be better defined. That is really tough, and I think the reason why SFDB gets so many projects and it takes so much time is because this is the personal aspect. This is where you live. This is where and it's just, I can understand that. So, so those, I thought those things were very helpful. I think they need to be addressed. I would like to see, and Ms. Ostringer would have to comment on this, on page 2, which is 5 of 7 of the staff report, where the notice of appeal is crossed out. As Commissioner DeLuccio commented, I would like to actually see that left in there. I think it's important, but then change to public hearing before the Planning Commission on appeal. Just because if it gets repeated, fine. All the information is right here then, as opposed to having to look at another section. And I think it's important for people to understand if they're appealing a project or if the applicant is appealing a SFDB decision, that this is right here, and that they know that there's going to be a public notice that goes out. So, Ms. Ostringer, is that possible to do?
Yes, Commissioner Wiscombe.
Okay, that's great. And other than that, those are my comments, and I'd be happy to make a motion when the time comes. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Vice Chair Bauke, please.
Madam Chair, I definitely support this action that you're proposing. And I think you've clearly articulated the problem that we have, which is there's a whole lot of stuff that goes to you. And I think what I would suggest, and I think I hope the rest of the commission would support, is having staff actually go through the process of figuring out what objective standards and guidance and, even like on materials and things like that, just, bring it up to date, figure out, work with the single family design board to basically have a better screening methodology so your burden of review is simplified. You can only do so much, and I'd rather have you spend your time on the important things versus all the little details. Most homeowners try to do the best they can if they're given guidance anyway, so to to the extent you can continue this effort, and I don't know if there's budget for it or not, but that's one thing I think is very important, to start bringing objective standards so we can focus on what's important, and the time and effort and money that the single-family homeowners have to spend in the city process can be, minimized to the extent possible. I'm a true believer in what I call truth in zoning, that what you see when you read your zoning and you read the guidelines, that you can do what it says, and the more arbitrary and capricious the board, the design boards are, we sort of lose our we'll call it our focus as to that relationship with the community, that, they get jaded, and they think that it's us versus them and things like that, and we just don't want that. So, the clearer it can be as to what the city's standards are and how we can clear through the process of all that detail, and speed up the process, the better everybody's going to be off. So, thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Commissioner Lodge, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This single-family design board arose from a project that Ms. Kokinda slightly reviewed to on Shoreline Drive. And before there was any regulation of single-family home designs, the homeowner demolished one of those original 1948 or so small one-story homes with single-car garages and built a house that occupied every cubic foot available between setback line and setback line and height limit. And you can pick it out when you drive by. So I think it's been a very useful ordinance. It certainly has created a lot of work and heartache for people, but I think it's very well worth being in place. And it was, and in general, mansionization was going on in places where existing older homes were torn down. So it has successfully dealt with that problem. I concur with the staff recommendation and just about all the comments that Commissioner Wiscombe made. I'm glad to see this coming before us. I always kind of wondered that it went directly to City Council in the first place. And it does, with no new evidence allowed, it does make the minutes, having strong, complete minutes, even more important. And I also concur, wherever, I know this isn't part of today's discussion, and I'm sure you're working on this, but, whatever minor changes that can be limited to staff review, that would be great. So thank you for the excellent presentation again, Ms. Kokinda.
Thank you. Next, we have Commissioner Boss, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will echo fellow commissioners just with gratitude for the background and the presentation and answering a lot of questions and thinking out loud. Really appreciate that today, especially a couple of notes in the presentation. I think it was slide 14 about the root causes and noting the inadequate housing supply as a major issue that's led to a lot of these potential changes or proposed changes today. And also on slide 17, the improved communications. I appreciated that detail. I know staff time is very valuable, and we want processes for the public and for staff alike to be efficient and effective. So I also agree with the decrease in the number of hearings and the proposed amendments, including the Mr. Sweeney's recommendations as outlined by Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you. Next, we have Commissioner DeLuccio, please.
I'll talk faster than I usually do now. Actually, I want to thank staff. I think, and you really showed your passion today for your work. And being a newer commissioner, this is outstanding, so helpful. And thank you. I'm very supportive of this. I'm very supportive of streamlining and continuing to do so. And thanks for clarifying the notice of appeal in here. and also my other concerns about, and, you know, coming before us with a project for coastal development permit, and then also putting our other hat on and looking at the design, if that gets appealed before us. I'm comfortable with the explanation of how that would work. And as far as the minutes go, even though the minutes are not spelled out, the nice thing now versus some years ago, all these meetings are recorded. So you can go, so what I do, if something's come before us, I will go and I will look at the recording of that particular meeting to get all the detail. Because frankly, when I do look at the minutes, there's not a lot of detail in the minutes. And I understand that it's, to do minutes and flesh out minutes is very, very time consuming. So they need to just summarize what's going on. I have not seen the SBMC minutes, but I have seen the HDL minutes, and I thought those minutes are really good in the way they spell out what took place. The chair there is really outstanding, and they actually have all the steps of all the outcomes, everything discussed, and I think that's summarized really, really well and well in detail at the end of the minutes, and what the recommendation or next steps would be. So I just want to throw that out. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And next, we have Commissioner Wardlow, please.
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. Thank you, staff. I really appreciated the conversation. I'm very happy to see all the work that you guys are doing on this. Clearly, the whole commission is very supportive of streamlining, and I am supportive of amending the SFPD appeal procedure, as well as ensuring that there's only one appeal in the process. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you. And I'll go next. I just wanted to thank you very, very much for being open to our comments and brainstorming right along with us. I apologize that my questions became a deliberation, so I don't need to deliberate per se, but I did want to just review a couple quick things. We talked about updating the SFDB guidelines to potentially find, if possible, an opportunity to add discretionary or staff director or staff discretionary review to help reduce the number of projects that then go to the design board. I'm completely in favor of updating the definitions, especially the definition of compatibility, adding very clear findings for each project, as a board in general, to make sure that the board members understand their purview, understand what they need to touch on and where they need to stop. I wanted to also comment on what you said about being very cautious or conscientious about not limiting architectural styles in different areas. However, as a city, as a whole, we have architectural style limitations per se. I mean, obviously, some of that's just in the ordinance with height and so on. But I wanted to just suggest that there be some form of community residential design guidelines that are clearly attached to the design review boards, because when we submit applications, there are for example, plan set guidelines, and it clearly says this is what needs to be provided. You know, you have to have photos, you have to touch on X, Y, and Z. Some projects have FAR requirements, others don't. Some have the neighborhood vicinity requirements, others don't. So I think it would be really helpful to put together kind of a reduced version and keep it all in one place, so that when somebody's looking at their project going to your design board, whatever that board is, they know that this applies to them. And also, when we have upset neighbors, when we have public commenters, eventually the potential of an appeal, they come back to this and they make sure, hey, can I complain about something? It's not here. I think, again, we mentioned it in our question period. I think this would be very helpful to staff. It'll be helpful during the actual hearings. Hopefully, over time, it'll help increase awareness of public members and will result in more streamlined review periods. And I wanted to just suggest, if it hasn't happened yet, to refer to the county's way of, the way they handle community residential design guidelines, although they do it in community areas, and that may not apply to us, but it can't hurt. You might find something that's useful. I also want to just reemphasize whatever this effort turns into, if it turns into a handout, that it can be put into every notice package that goes out, just to help increase public awareness and help the public commenters and neighbors to be more efficient when they do come forward or write letters, and draw the focus on property rights versus opinions. I think that'll be really helpful, and it's a conversation I've had with a number of my homeowners when they're going through the process, and, you know, I have to remind them that this is the purview and this is what they need to understand, and it helps level expectation. I think everyone wants that. I also want to just suggest that if there's a possibility to create partnerships, as we said, with the AIA or somebody else in the community that's willing to help, to provide applicants and homeowners with as much support, providing guidance and access to expert advice, and help them to understand the guidelines that we're going to be setting in place, I expect that it will improve the entire process for everyone. And it also may allow access to licensed professionals, especially if, from my memory, we have reduced the board to 5 members, of which only 1 is a licensed architect, so we don't even have that expertise per se in bulk on the review body. You can correct me if I missed that up.
Chair Bonderson, so the way that it's written in the ordinance, how council adopted it, is that of the 5 members, 1 has to be a licensed architect, but we're fortunate that the current membership, there are actually 4 licensed architects and 1 public at large. So we've
That's
got
excellent.
a lot of expertise, and I'm very thrilled with our current board.
Oh, yes, and I'm glad to hear that. I didn't realize all of them were licensed, but even when we have practitioners that are in the field, they may not be licensed, that's still really great to have. And I was just putting that out there in the event that we had 4 community members and only 1 is a licensed architect. It puts a lot of pressure on that 1 person, so having that extra support could be useful. So I just want to end by thanking you very much. It was very clear as you presented how much effort you put into getting ready for today, and I strongly appreciate it. I really think that this was a wonderful way to get our comments and recommendations. I support this wholeheartedly, and I hope that the council has everything they need to move forward. Thank you so much. With that, I will open this up for a motion, and I believe Commissioner Wiscombe is interested.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually was being prodded over here by my fellow commissioner here. Turn on your light. Let the truth be known, at any rate. So I'm going to move the staff recommendation to amend Santa Barbara Municipal Code 2269080 for the SFDB appeals coming directly to the Planning Commission instead of City Council, with the addition of including Section 2B, Notice of Appeal, and changing that from City Council to Planning Commission, just so we're clear that that the appeal gets noticed to appropriate parties. And determine that the project is categorically exempt from further environmental review. And then I would like to also include, and I'm not sure how to word this, but I'd like to include some food for thought to City Council. Maybe that's the best way to put it, which would include Mr. Sweeney's recommendations, particularly that the minutes of the SFDB meetings be more thorough. And I think that's will really help streamline the process, and that perhaps staff and maybe some members of the current SSDB or even Mr. Sweeney could work on what he meant by guidelines to ordinance, maybe some provisions that would be more helpful to be ordinances rather than guidelines. And the mass, bulk, and scale, actually definitions be given, maybe that the enforcement process is better defined, and neighborhood compatibility is better defined. And finally, that and this to me is not food for thought, but this is a recommendation to City Council, that the appeals, the SFDB appeals be limited only at the phase of project design approval. And I think that, and then I know Commissioner Bonderson talked about a handout, so let's add that to food for thought, that maybe one could be developed that streamlines the process, that includes some of these things that Mr. Sweeney's talked about, and where they can find more information, et cetera, and how the process works if you're thinking about appealing a project, no matter whether you're the applicant or a neighbor. So those all go in food for thought, except for the project design approval appeal. That goes in the recommendation. And that's my motion. Thank you.
I'll
Excellent.
second her motion.
Is that okay? All right, well, we have a second, and that was Commissioner Wardlow. And I would like to open this up if there's any discussion on the motion itself. And it doesn't seem like it. Mrs. Sparza, would you please take a roll call vote for us?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. I'll take the roll call vote. Commissioner Lodge.
Yes.
Commissioner Wardlow.
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe.
Yes.
Commissioner Boss.
Yes.
Commissioner DeLuccio.
Yes.
Vice Chair Bauke.
Yes.
And Chair Bonderson.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Very good. And before we close this, I didn't want it to interrupt the motion, the discussion for the motion, but I wanted to just add a thought, another food for thought. It doesn't have to be, it's just for you. It doesn't have to go anywhere. But I was going to say there are some functions on like the recording device at a meeting where you can just push a button and it will produce a transcript. And it may be useful for somebody who doesn't have the time to watch the video and to go through, fast forward, to see a written transcript and then go to a certain, part of the hearing, or to actually read. Sometimes people like to read more because it's faster for some people, where they go straight to the deliberating comments. And then that could give us a much more detailed, in-depth summary, instead of just looking at the meeting minutes, which we already have discussed is a great idea to improve on. So just another helpful effort.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it.
Good, great. And I just want to say thank you one more time to you, your staff, your team, Mr. Hamilton, and also Mr. Sweeney for being a big part of this after 10 years. Ms. Kukinda, thank you. All right, we are now going to go to a brief, let's say, 7 minutes recess, and we will be back at 3:30. Planning Commission hearing back to order. It is 3:32, and we will be moving on to item number 4. This is a project located at 1713 Lasuen, if I pronounce that right, Lasuen Road. And before we begin, I just need to ask if any commissioners have had any ex parte communication that they need to disclose at this time. No, very good. So we have Ms. Plummer from the city here to give us a staff presentation. The floor is yours when you are ready.
Great. Thank you, Chair Bonderson. Yes, I'm Pilar Plummer, Associate Planner with the City of Santa Barbara Planning and Zoning Division, and I'll be giving the presentation today regarding 1713 Lasuen Road. On the screen, you'll just see a vicinity map of the neighborhood with the project site highlighted in yellow. This is a street view of the project site. And to begin with, I do want to talk a little bit about the historic significance of the existing residence. So it is a historic resource. It was constructed in 1923 in the American colonial revival style. The front facade conveys the majority of its original 1923 appearance. Character-defining features include the two-story massing with a side gable roof and symmetrical facade, central entrance, and wide wood shiplap siding, for example. The house is also representative of the small house movement, and specifically, that was from the 1920s, and it embodies characteristics of houses found in pattern books promoting the American colonial revival style as part of that movement. Additionally, there is the use of sandstone lining the streetscape, which is also of significance. Alterations have occurred since the original 1923 construction, including a garage and driveway that was added in 1927, as well as other improvements primarily at the rear, which included enlarging a bedroom and enclosing a deck without a permit, for example, and other improvements. The residence was reviewed by the Historic Landmarks Commission not only for the project but for its designation in February of this year and was designated a structure of merit. The overall project is a renovation of the historic residence, including demolition of the existing garage and workshop to be replaced with a new garage and workshop in generally the same location. A new addition is a partially below grade gym below the workshop, which I'll show you in plan form later, of 256 square feet. The project also includes 2 new upper floor additions to accommodate a 126 square foot mechanical room and 156 square foot primary bath. There's also a new elevator being installed that will access all 3 floors, reopening an exterior deck at the rear, and an interior remodel. The purpose of this meeting specifically is for the Planning Commission to review the applicant's request for an interior setback modification to grant relief from the interior setback standards. That's specific to the garage and workshop, as well as a floor-to-lot area ratio modification to grant relief from the net floor area standards, which I'll be covering in more detail later, as well as determining that the project is categorically exempt from further environmental review pursuant to California Environmental Quality Act's Guideline 15301 for existing facilities. So on the screen, you'll see a table which summarizes the project's zoning ordinance consistency. This is a very unique residence. It's considered non-conforming currently to 2 setbacks, both the front and the western interior, as well as to the floor-to-lot area ratio and building height. Just to point out, this asterisk here related to the front setback, which notes 25 feet. The project site is located in the RS-15 zoning district and generally has a 30-foot front setback requirement. However, the zoning ordinance does include a provision for setback reduction for sloping lots where the average slope is more than 20% within the first 50 feet of the front lot line. That setback can be reduced by 5 feet. This particular project has a 21.03% average slope within that 50-foot area between the front lot line. And so it qualifies for the 25-foot. As part of the project, you'll note the existing, it's 18 feet 10 inches, and with the new design for the garage, they are pushing it back to 25 feet to meet that setback requirement. For the existing interior, again, this applies to the garage and workshop. The closest point, it's not a direct, just given the angle, and you'll see that again in plan form later. It's at 1 foot 9.5 inches currently, and they are proposing to increase the distance, so to reduce the existing encroachment, moving the building away. So that is 4 feet 8.5 inches at the closest point. Regarding building height, and I'll show you on the next sheet as well, the existing height at its highest point is 34 feet 7 inches, and they are proposing to reduce that slightly to 33 feet. Also, again, non-conforming to the floor to lot area ratio at 95% currently with 3,972 square feet. They are doing a slight increase in floor area, so they're requesting 99% of the maximum required FAR. This particular sheet is just to give context for the existing garage and workshop, so hopefully you can see my mouse, but that is the garage workshop here, which is proposed to be replaced with a new garage and workshop. It will be eliminating that flat roof and doing a gable to be more cohesive with the rest of the residence. But this is primarily to show, again, the building height, 34 feet 7 inches here, and that is being reduced. You can see the outline down to 33 feet. The zoning ordinance does allow for alterations to buildings that are non-conforming to building height, specifically that the alteration does not increase or relocate the height or volume of the portion that exceeds the maximum height. And again, in this case, the applicant is actually reducing height, so it'll be more conforming, and the project does not include a relocation of volume. Therefore, the alteration is allowed. The project was reviewed by the Historic Landmarks Commission on February 15th, 2023. At the hearing, the HLC expressed general appreciation for the project overall and the care for the historic resource. They also noted support unanimously for the requested modifications, at least when it comes to FAR, noting the massing and breakup of the building as appropriate for the historic resource and design. The commission did have some comments in general to simplify and lower the overall garage height, including study of the gable design, the garage door as well, which the applicant has responded to in some way, and they'll cover that a little bit more in their presentation. Another thing that came up for the Historic Landmarks Commission was consideration of the neighbor that is closest to the garage. Obviously, given the building footprint, it is challenging that the garage currently is so close to the property line at 1 feet 9 inches, and while they're reducing the level of encroachment, unfortunately, they can't get it to the 10-foot setback requirement. So the HLC did inquire if there was the ability to get a waiver from transportation to have a reduced width for the interior of the garage, and that was approved by Transportation Division. So that is something that happened as a result of the HLC's comments. And again, in general, they expressed support for the modifications. Just so you can see some of the elevations existing currently, and then on the right is the proposed. So where my mouse is right here, that is the addition for the new primary bath. Here is the mechanical room, and again, the garage going from a flat roof to the new garage design. And in this, I showed an existing photo of the house. A lot of improvements are being proposed at the back of the house. This is the workshop here currently with a lattice structure underneath. As part of this project, they're proposing, again, a new garage and workshop with the partially below-grade gym, and that's a room intended for usable space, but also to provide structural support for the workshop above. And then here, where my mouse is, you'll see that there is a deck, which did receive a permit to have a cover, but was subsequently enclosed with glass without a permit. That room is not counted in the existing floor area because, again, it was enclosed without a permit. But they are proposing to reopen that as part of this project, and you'll see that here is a new deck area. To move on to the modifications being requested. So the first is the interior setback modification. On the left, you'll see an existing site plan, or part of the site plan in any case, with the closest point, again, 1 feet, 9.5 inches. That is being slightly pushed away so that it will be 4 feet at the closest point, down to 8 feet where the workshop and gym is located. And again, unfortunately, given the residence footprint and topography, including relationship to the site, a garage that is attached to the residence cannot meet the 10-foot setback requirement. So that is, again, why they are requesting an interior setback modification in this case. Staff is supportive of the interior setback modification because the improvements to the residence will protect and enhance the character of the low-density residential neighborhood. And the design and scale, as communicated by the Historic Landmarks Commission, are generally compatible with the neighborhood. Staff is also supportive because the design would be more conforming to the setback requirement that exists on site than what currently exists on site. The lot is constrained by the existing residence footprint, which occupies much of the front lot width, as well as by topography as the lot progressively slopes down from Lesuin Road. And windows on the west elevation, so on the side facing the neighbor closest to the garage, are located such that they provide negligible impact relative to privacy concerns. And again, that is a garage structure that is closest to that property line. The design also provides a cohesive floor plan to the rest of the residence. The FAR modification, so this is a little bit more complex, so I'll try to go through all the details behind how we determine that a modification is required in this case. But the maximum floor area is applicable only to single-unit residential zones that have less than 15,000 square feet of net lot area and that are also developed with a main building that is 2 or more stories in height or have a building height of 17 feet or greater. This particular project is 0.31 acres, which is approximately 13,673 square feet. And obviously it exceeds 17 feet in height, so it is subject to a maximum required, not guideline, floor area. The zoning ordinance further stipulates that no building permit can be approved that will result in an increase of floor area, change the location of floor area at the second or higher story, or 3, increase the height of any portion of the structure to 17 feet or higher. If any of the following will occur, the floor area will exceed the allowable maximum floor area of the lot, or the floor area will exceed 85%. And this is the particular one. So yes, it will exceed 85%. The existing floor area is already at 95%, and they are requesting 99%. And this 85% is specifically captured when the height of the structure on the lot exceeds 25 feet. As is the case with this building, it does exceed 25 feet, so they are subject to an 85 rather than a 100% required FAR. And that's very worth noting. Were the residents to be 25 feet in height or less, the project would be subject to 100% FAR, not 85%, and would not require a modification relative to floor area in that case. On the screen, you'll see the proposed, and this doesn't include all 3 floor plans. The left is the basement, and I just wanted to highlight these because this shows the new areas that are being proposed. So to the left is the gym, and then at the 3rd floor, or the top floor, that is the mechanical room and patio, as well as the primary bath. So in total square footage, that new square footage for the gym is 256 square feet. And for the left, both of these are under 200 square feet. In total, the project results in an increase of 191 square feet of floor area on the site. In order for the Planning Commission to approve an FAR modification, not less than 6 members of the Historic Landmarks Commission must vote in support of the modification following a concept review of the project. The subject lot must also have a physical condition such as location, surroundings, topography, or the size or dimensions of the lot relative to others in the neighborhood. And also related to physical condition, the lot must allow for the project to be compatible with other development in the neighborhood. The general plan land use designation for the project site is low-density residential, max 3 dwelling units per acre. The general plan notes that this is intended to provide 15,000 square feet of lot area as a minimum. The project site is under that at 13,603 square feet. The zoning district, again, is RS15, and were this to be a newly created lot in the city, given the slope, which is above 20%, they would be required to have 30,000 square feet, so they're clearly under that as well. I do also want to point out again, the project site is directly adjacent to a number of parcels that exceed 15,000 square feet, so they're not bound to a required FAR like this project. They would be able to go to 100% or above as a guideline rather than a required FAR, and would not need a modification. In terms of the physical conditions of the site, and I covered this a little bit previously, but what's unique about this particular site is the footprint and size of the residence, the non-conforming building height, its historic significance, topography as it slopes down from Les Wen Road. If you'll remember from the site visit, as viewed from the street, it primarily appears as a 1 to 2 story structure, and then at the rear you see the majority of the bulk with a 3-story facade. In terms of compatibility, the HLC again expressed general support for the project overall. In terms of neighborhood compatibility, the applicant also provided in their plan set, and this information was presented to the Historic Landmarks Commission, a street silhouette elevation, aerial streetscape, and 20 closest lots analysis. Lastly, accepting the floor area modification, this overall project would be more consistent with the zoning ordinance by providing required parking, preserving open yard, shifting the garage back to meet the front setback requirement, reducing the existing interior setback encroachment, and reducing the non-conforming building height by just over a foot. As part of our internal review, the historian for the city, Ms. Hernandez, prepared a memo evaluating the project to the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties, and ultimately concluded that the additions and overall improvements being proposed would not impact the building's ability to convey its 1923 appearance, and therefore it's a less than significant review. And then from that, staff determined that the project would be exempt from California Environmental Quality Act for 15301, which does allow for repair, maintenance, minor alterations, and additions to an existing structure involving negligible or no expansion of the existing or former use. So staff is recommending that the Planning Commission approve the interior setback modification, as well as the floor to lot area ratio modification, and determine that the project is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act for 15301 existing facilities. And if you have any questions, I will be here. That concludes my presentation. The applicant team is here, Nicole Bergelen, as well as the owner. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Plummer. Does the applicant have a presentation for us? Come on up. And when you get here to the podium, I'd like to ask you just to introduce yourself for the record before you begin your presentation. Ms. Esparza, you'll manage the time? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, can you guys, is that working?
Yes, thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Bonderson and Commissioners. My name is Nicole Bergel. I'm acting as agent and here on behalf of Adam Graham, the owner and builder. As we also have Risa Hong, who's our architectural drafter with us today, who can speak to maybe some of the more technical questions if you have any about the numbers. We appreciate the opportunity to present the Graham family's request for your support of the zoning modifications necessary to restore what we're hoping is architectural integrity and functionality to the residents at 1713 LaSwain. Ms. Plummer did a really great job, and I may skip through a few of my slides to save us some time, but there are some project stats here, or parcel stats that she covered. The most important one in our mind is that the garage, as it exists, is 1 foot 9.5 inches from that western lot line at the closest point, and we're hoping to be able to improve that condition with our project. So to that point, you can see the proposed project on the right there. At the closest point, 4 feet 8.5 inches. We're able to also pull the garage entirely out of the front setback, improving the street sort of scape and experience. Commissioner DeLuccio requested that we speak to this during our presentation during the site visit on Tuesday, and so I wanted to point out that the existing garage does not conform to the current parking standards. To demolish it and replace it, you would need to conform to the parking standards, and we did get that waiver from transportation to reduce the clear distance interior of the garage to 19 feet from the required 20 in order to pull that garage out of the interior setback a little bit further. He asked why not 18, and it really is a structural issue. The door is required to be 16 feet wide and to accommodate 2 vehicles, and between the door opening and the walls, there isn't really room to go to 18. This is the rear. Again, just wanting to point out on that left-hand slide that the workshop and garage really are quite a bit farther from the lot line in the back portion, and that will be increased. You can also see there, of course, the basement level that results in 3 stories on the back versus the 2 you see from the front. And it's a bit looming, and our design does propose to reduce that effect. Again, Ms. Plummer covered the lot constraints very well, and I'll just reiterate that it is a pretty steep lot, 23% slope on average, which means it's steeper in some places, and it's already quite built out. The permitted structure is 95% of FAR, and is already in the setbacks. And there's also there is the existence or the presence of some protected oaks that do limit where the property can be developed. The proposed project, you saw this sort of comparison in Ms. Plummer's presentation too. As we have described, proposes to demolish the existing garage, replacing it with new garage pulled back from this front setback, and then a smaller workshop and gym below, the gym partly for structural reasons. There's the location of the primary bathroom, the new primary bathroom over the music room. And that's where the mechanical room and there's a small deck behind are located. These wings essentially also add some symmetry to the design, which is one of the character-defining characteristic of the style. You know what I mean. Similarly, in the back, there are many improvements planned. I think the one of note is the removal of the glass around the porch to restore that to an open air condition, and then the addition of the gym there, circled on the left, and then you can see the two wings, sort of, you could call them, above the music room and the existing library there. Again, Ms. Plummer covered this very thoroughly, but I will just reiterate that we're pleased that the design as proposed pulls the garage out of the front setback entirely and does pull it out of the interior setback more than it already exists. The window on the garage, on the western side of the garage that faces the neighbor, is fixed, so and the garage is not a very intense use of that structure. It's not a residential piece of the not a living room or a bedroom. And that HLC did support the design. We got supportive comments from them and have responded to the comments that we received, reducing the garage somewhat in height and addressing some elements on the facade as they requested. So we believe it's an aesthetic improvement as well. Thank you for your consideration of our request today.
Thank you, Ms. Burgio. So next, we will open this up for public comment, and I'm going to ask you, Ms. Esparza, if we have any comments from members of the public pertaining to this item, either remotely or in the room.
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. We do not have any virtual participants. We do have one speaker slip for Richard Curtis. Mr. Curtis, if you'd like to come up.
I'm 92, so I move slow. But I'll get there.
Take your time. We're happy to have you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Curtis?
Happy to be here. I was here about 30 years ago. I was general manager and vice president of Raytheon out in Goleta.
Oh, wow.
And I was here because I wanted to stop my people from driving to work. And along with all the other companies that I was going to be a hardship, and thank God it didn't. That didn't happen. But the reason I'm here, 1717 Les Wen is a great home. I've lived in it for more than 50 years. I was married on the deck.
Oh, no.
I bought it from the widow of a very famous Bishop James Pike, who some of you may remember, was famous for being the first bishop to be tried for heresy in 160 years, which is, though he said he wouldn't preach anymore. He wanted to find more of the Dead Sea Scrolls, so he started a foundation in the basement of the house. And living next to 1713, there was a great attorney at the time that was my neighbor. His name is Goo. I mean, you may remember him. But then the house was sold to the Gillespies, and the Gillespie, wonderful person, her husband, I helped him do some work online. And there's a big, well, first of all, I can understand replacing the garage. It's amazingly bad. The problem that Adam, who came up and talked to me yesterday, has is that the road height is about 6 to 7 feet above the level of the surface of the ground. Now, that was solved back in 1929 by putting stilts underneath the floor. And I mean, it's amazing. Look at a bunch of popsicle sticks, all different angles, 2x8s, 2x6s. And it's since been condemned because it just plain isn't safe. I understand, has to be removed. What bugs me, you have setbacks in Santa Barbara for a reason. The setback of about 18 inches, or a little over 1 foot, is what you're looking at for the current garage. Now, Mr. Graham came and told me that he had decided he would reduce the width of the garage, and he said that took a lot of work with the city to get that permission from. I didn't know that you had to have 2-car garages, but whatever. And so as a result, I got a wonderful 3 feet, 4 feet, about 3 feet from the 1 foot to 3 foot. That is just not right. If it were me, I love garage. I have, luckily, a 2.5-car garage, so I have a workshop in there. And if I were doing it, I would take that, well, back east where I come from, we call them breezeways. It's a little wet place between the side of the house and the garage. And he said it was a library. He would have to tell you what that means. I would remove that in the construction and put the garage up to the house with a door or whatever into the kitchen or whatever is needed. That would allow him to put a full-size garage, and it would give me about 8 foot of setback versus 3 or 4. That's just a recommendation, which he will hopefully consider. The next problem is rain. My driveway starts at road level and goes down about 10 feet or more. It has about a 25-degree angle, then it turns around, comes down. I have a swale at the bottom, so water doesn't come into my garage. How he's going to get that garage floor usable from the road, to come in from the road, is going to be an amazing bit of architecture. What my fear was, he was going to build a cement block or whatever wall, which I would be looking like the size of a prison or something without any windows. And that would just be too ugly. I'm not sure that I want to take any more time. I'm only allowed 2 minutes anyway. But, and he has been cooperative. He came over to see me, gave me the plans, and looked at it. And I'm sure that we can work together. We'll become good neighbors. I've been good neighbors for 50 years with everyone sitting in there. And I'm an engineer. And so engineers think in terms of slopes. I did a little trigonometry to see he's going to have to put a driveway down at about a 34-degree angle or more. I hope to heck it, when the ground is changed, that they think about where that rain is going to go, because I don't want it coming my way. I'm lucky with what I have with my big swale and stuff, that the big rains that we had, I didn't have it in the house or the garage.
Thank you so much, Mr. Curtis.
Thank you.
I personally want to thank you for sitting through 3 hours waiting for your turn. It is never comfortable sitting on that side of the wall here, but thank you for being here today.
Well, when your neighbor is that close, you've got to
Sit through it.
suffer a little bit, right?
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for coming. Do we have any other public speakers, either remotely or here in the room with us?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. We do not have any virtual participants nor any more speaker slips. We did receive some written correspondence from Richard Curtis and Paulina Kahn, which was distributed to the commission. Back to you.
Thank you very much. I just want to say I appreciated the history. Learning a little bit about Bishop Pike was also very fun. We will move out of public comment now, and I will open up the question period to my fellow commissioners. I want to make sure, Commissioner Wardlow, this was from the past. So we will start with Vice Chair Bauke, please.
Madam Chair, and I've got a couple questions, one to staff and one to the applicant. Could you explain, actually, I got two, sorry about that, how the garage was built so close to that property line in the first place? Did we not have a zoning ordinance or zoning enforcement? It makes no sense to me that it would ever have been built that close. I mean, in certain areas of downtown, you've got zero lot lines and stuff that were going on historically, but up in the hills, it didn't seem to make any sense that that was the case. And
If I may, it was an empty lot. My house was built in 65, and when this garage was built, I think this was 29, that was a bare lot, probably pretty ugly lot too, without any taking.
Mr. Curtis, I think it's really valuable what you have to say, but we need to have you at the mic. Do you mind coming back up and sharing that again? You might even stay in the first row. We might call you as an expert witness more often. Just come on up before you begin, and I have you repeat if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, I was just answering the gentleman's
Yes, would you mind
question.
starting
Why
again?
would you ever get a permit to put a house or a garage within 1 foot or so of a property line? And the answer was, at the time, in 1929, 1930, there was a bare lot, okay? There wasn't the same concern of the citizenry at that time, particularly of, well, just a bare lot. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised, and I'm going to talk to Adam about meeting with his surveyors, because I had my lot surveyed, and when I look at the 100-foot across, and I stand there where there's a bunch of trees right now, it's at least no more than, say, 15 inches from the line. So that's pretty close when you have setbacks, typically 8 to 10 feet. I hope that answered your question.
yeah, no, it did.
Thank you, and thank you so much, sir. I just want to give a little bit more, I'll read something from.
Can I hold
Yeah.
you for a moment? I just want to help facilitate a little bit. Commissioner Lodge, did you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I've had a question for Mr. Curtis, so.
Okay, why don't we have Mr. Curtis make your way back up? But if you don't mind, I'll have you just. Mr. Curtis, would you mind just staying in the front row? We'll have you stand up in just a moment, and I'm going to have Ms. Plummer finish her thought relating to this question before we go forward, but don't go too far. Ms. Plummer, back to you, please.
Well, firstly, what I can say is there's a clear permit for the garage and driveway installation, and I'll
What
just.
year?
1927, yeah. And I just want to give, this is from the historic significance report about the historic context. So the house sits in the Riviera neighborhood, which was developed between circa 1900 and 1940. In 1920, the only buildings listed in the city directory along West One Road were the Santa Barbara Normal School, now the Riviera campus, and El Encanto Hotel. By 1922, a few houses were listed in the city directory, including 1726 and 1730. In 1923, this house was constructed. So there really wasn't much there at the time period when the permit came forward for the garage installation, as well as for the prior house. And it was prior ordinance.
Right, so there were no setbacks at that time.
Yeah.
There's the answer.
You answered that question. Okay, that was the question. Normally, you would see that like in a downtown setting, that would be the case. But second question is trying to understand the FAR modification. If I get this right, it's because the house is taller than 25 feet, or is it because it is on a sloping lot, or both that we jump to the
It's-
85?
Through the chair, Commissioner Bauke, it's a couple things. So a modification is required in this case. Number one, because of the increase in floor area, it's already non-conforming right now. The stipulation that it has to be 85% rather than 100% like you would see for other development in town is because the existing residence exceeds 25 feet in height. So that's where the modification is coming into play. It's because it is over 25 feet in height, they are increasing the floor area, and they're adding to the upper floor additions. So all of that factors into the modification.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you for that clarity. One question for the applicant. And this touches on the commenters. I had the same question, is about how you're going to handle the drainage on the lower driveway for the revised garage. You know, what's your approach to dealing with rainwater? Are you going to put in a drain system right in front of the garage, or multiple drain systems? Because I can see a lot of water heading towards your garage, and how that's going to address and be captured and not run off to the neighboring property. Could you explain that to me?
Of course. One of the ways of lessening the slope from the street level to the garage is we are pulling it back 5 feet. So I've got a few extra feet to work with to diminish that slope from the street. The surface area of the driveway would be roughly 20 by 25, so it's about 450 square feet. So it's not a whole lot of water. There is a pretty good amount of fall to the west of the driveway, so the driveway could not only fall back towards the garage, but it could also tip to the left. I would have a channel drain that's at the back end of the driveway, also to pick up that water, and in fact is on the north side of the building. So theoretically, rainfall that would hit that directly would be less than if it was on the south side of the building. I was not as concerned with drainage as the overall height of the garage in relationship to the house and looming over the neighbor. So at the moment, the garage is actually 30 inches higher. The floor level of the garage is 30 inches higher than I'm proposing, but it is closer to the street. So if you went and saw the house now, the slope of the driveway would be roughly what it is now, give or take about 5%. Because we're lengthening the driveway distance. So I'm not thinking at all. I'm also a general contractor, a landscape contractor, and we do a lot of drainage work as part of our daily operations. I'm not thinking at all that the drainage in the front of the driveway is going to be an issue.
Okay. You addressed my question.
If I may.
Yeah.
It's also, the project is subject to Tier 1 stormwater management program, so we have in place rain gardens and things that are designed to handle everything that's coming off any impervious surface.
Okay, so you're going to have that capture mechanism plus basically the channel drain in front of the garage to handle it. Okay. And it's going to be directed away from your neighbor's property, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Well, there's at the moment, there's quite a substantial masonry wall between the two properties. The pittosporum hedges that you saw on the slides obscure a 1920s pretty massive block stone wall in between the two. So water from both sides would have to breach that wall or come up and over the wall. It's part of the original development of 1713 had these pretty substantial amount of masonry on all four sides. So it's
Thank
already
you.
there.
And before I call the next commissioner, I just wanted to complete a thought, and I will go back. I know. I wanted to just complete a thought so that it's not lost in separation. Have you already proposed any drawings showing the stormwater and/or complete drainage system at this point of the process?
I believe we have.
Is it part of your current plan set?
It is, yes.
Do we have a copy of that?
Hi.
You can bring the microphone down.
Hi, Madam Chair and Commissioner. I'm Risa Hong, and we do have proposed and calculations on the cover sheet of our plan set. So it's actually Tier 2, and we do propose a rain garden that it's more than adequate for what our calculation gallons will be to manage all the water that come toward the lower property side, toward the south side.
Thank you. Was there a drawing as part of this plan set shown to us? Was it submitted? I mean, maybe Ms. Plummer knows the answer. That way we can look at it.
I do have the project plans available, and they were included in your packet as well. Yeah, I can pull up the cover sheet with the statistics that she's referencing.
Yeah, I mean, it's really small. I can see that, but I don't see like a site plan with a landscape plan and some drainage. I can use this. I will ask that question when it's my turn. I just wanted to know if it was submitted at least so we can see it on the screen. I'll come back to it. You don't have to do it now. Oh, you're way ahead of me. That way at least we can.
And Ms. Huang, if you want to direct me to the section that
You have a
you want to
site
look at,
plan for
because,
this?
yeah, this is the impervious area calculations here, and then I can pull up the site plan as well.
That, the area in question is on the lower 25% of the property, so it levels out before it jumps down to the neighbor to the south of us. There we go. So that, below the swimming pool, this 10 by 26 inch, 10 foot by 26 foot rain garden, the plan is to excavate that and actually backfill that with gravel, so to make a subterranean surge tank, if you will, and then I would landscape that with sedge and other native grasses just to keep it from being bare dirt. But it's a nice kind of out of sight, out of mind part of the lower property that won't really get much use because it's pretty steep down there. But it does level off nicely in the area of the rain garden. And you can see these old masonry walls that are below it. Yeah, that's another.
Those were existing. We saw them.
Yeah, when we were there, we were standing on
Right on
a
it.
terrace right above that. That's right.
And before we go on, can we scroll up to the garage area on this? Because perhaps there's some sort of demonstration of the drainage flow. That's what I think Commissioner Balke, Vice Chair Balke was aiming towards.
Yeah, okay, so to the area of the west of the garage and the workshop, there is a bit, like I said, there's a bit of a, it's not a ravine, but it's a fairly steeply sloped area that stops at a masonry wall that's along the property line. So any runoff in between the garage and the property line is basically captured and is forced to flow down towards the bottom of the property. And it's a little too steep to be putting in area drains. I don't know how effective they would be, so I'll have to do some working. You can see in the surveyor's notes, the existing swale to remain. So there's already a bunch of concrete and masonry diversions that keep the water kind of flowing towards the middle of the property.
Thank you, you answered my question. Good, thank you.
Thank you. And we have Commissioner DeLuccio next, but I want to just take a moment to see if perhaps, Commissioner Lodge, I did not want to imply that I forgot about you. Would you like to ask your question next? Would it connect?
It doesn't, it's not particularly about the drainage.
No, it was about the previous, I believe you wanted
Yeah,
to
well,
mistake.
it can come now
Oh.
or later.
Okay, well then I'll keep this in order.
Okay.
Okay, so back to you, Commissioner DeLuccio.
I would have waited if you want to go, Commissioner Lodge. You want to ask your question first?
Okay, it's a very simple question for Mr. Curtis.
Mr. Curtis?
But for the record, we need to have you come back up to the microphone. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Did you present the same concerns that you presented to us today to the Historic Landmarks Commission when this project was before them?
To the former neighbors? No.
To the Historical Landmarks Commission when it was being
No,
reviewed?
there's a very high hedge, it must be 10 or 12 feet.
No,
So,
I wanted to know if your concerns about the setback and your suggestion that the garage be put up against the existing house wall, did you make those same comments to the Historic Landmarks Commission?
yes.
You did. Okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to know.
No, it's probably solvable, but the thing is that the garage, as I say, it's on popsicle sticks, and so the water went underneath it. But I see in the plans that there's going to be some change in the contour of the land there. And I'm going to be amazed to see how the car can come off the road and go into a garage which is 6 or 7 feet down, and at that angle, it's going to be really tricky.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. I just wanted to know if you made your same comments that you made to us earlier to Historic Landmarks Commission. So I don't have any questions about
Oh, okay.
your concerns with the slope.
No, I have wonderful neighbors and so on, and we had no problem because the water went underneath the garage because of the popsicle stick
Thank you.
support.
Thank you, that's perfect, and we got the answer. So now I will officially call on Commissioner DeLuccio,
I
please.
think I forgot my questions. No, I actually only have 2 questions. They're really simple. Maybe the applicant can come up, or I think actually your representative maybe can answer those. One is, will there be 1 or 2 mechanical rooms?
So our proposal is actually, because it's a 3-story residential, and we were thinking we can put the AC unit close to the 3rd floor rather than put it in the existing mechanical room that it's fully underground. So that's why we have a tiny AC unit that attached to the house, and we're thinking actually using that space as part of the patios that it's next to the bedroom, and it's a good use. But the only concern is that we didn't know the patio actually come in too far. That the planner pointed out that because it's not fully open to the outdoor spaces, so it will contour the far. That's why our far is actually went up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's, if you want to.
Well, yeah, I did want to comment on the mechanical room and the new primary bathroom are there, I guess, fully roofed over for symmetrical purposes. But if we took the roof off of the mechanical room, the heat pumps wouldn't suffer. They're all-weather heat pumps. They need quite a bit of air to breathe. So the patio, if you will, and the opening on the north side are there to accommodate airflow for the 2 heat pump units. The house is tall enough and, I guess, disjointed enough in reality that it would need multiple units in order to both heat and cool it. So we're proposing a mechanical space on the roof level, if you will, and then an additional mechanical space that's in the yard that would sit down below the music room at ground level. But the line sets to run from, it just the expense and the efficiency begin to become a problem. So, but again, as she pointed out, part of the FAR handicap for us is that the mechanical space, which is not interior, it's not conditioned space, is actually counting against us. So if I pulled that square footage back out, we in essence wouldn't be really changing our FAR percentage at all.
You'd be at 95%.
Yes, we'd still be right in there.
Okay, that's interesting. One other question. I'm going to ask you one more time. I'm not going to keep talking about the garage. I just want to, if we can go to this slide, you really represented it well, the before and the after slides, proposed slides, because it's not been approved. If you can go back way, it's almost in the beginning. Okay, this slide here, which, yeah, so I guess now that the new, so the one that's, there's another slide that showed, really illustrated what the setback, the interior setback would be. We used to call the rear yard setback, but it's the interior. How it's actually going, it was almost 2 feet, and now it's going to be almost 5 feet, but it's actually going to go, as it goes further back, it's going to be more than 4.8? Is it going to go up to 5.32? Or is it?
No, that's how far it would be if it was, if we added another 5 feet, 5 feet 3.5 inches, it would then be within the side yard setback, and we wouldn't need to be applying for that modification. So it was out of compliance both in the front yard and the side yard setback, and by bringing the garage back 5 feet, We're only looking to get a modification for it to remain in the side yard setback.
Right, I understand that, because if you push the front to 25 square front, you're in the 25 feet now on the front. But the side was almost 2 feet before, right?
That's right.
Now it's going to be almost 5 feet.
That's right, that's correct.
I just want to illustrate that, because, so it's not a 10-foot setback, but 5 feet is, in my mind, is pretty decent.
There are.
It's some kind of relief. I was looking, that's why I asked the question, could it have gone a little more, the 19 to the 18? But I understand totally why the garage is going to be, it is what it is, the garage at 19, a little over 19. But I just wanted to see this illustrated, that you do have a lot more relief on this setback than you did before at 2 feet. You're almost 5 feet. So I just thought, I don't know if that's a question, but I just thought that'd be important to point out. So just thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, I just wanted to see that.
Thank you, Commissioner DeLuccio. Next, we have Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have one quick thing. I asked a question at the site visit. I think it's important to get it in the record regarding the FAR modification, and that's the partially below-grade basement. So, Ms. Plummer, if you could just tell us again what you told us at the site visit about how that's counted for FAR, that I'd appreciate that, to get it in the record. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the question. Through the chair, Commissioner Wiscombe. So there is a partially below grade basement, and a portion of it is actually crawl space, and the crawl space is not counted at all. As part of the FAR, it's excluded. And as far as the remainder of the basement, it is counted. However, the zoning ordinance does have a revision that allows you to reduce that by 50% of your FAR, and that is how that was calculated for this project.
And it gets reduced by 50% because it's partially below grade.
That's correct.
Yeah, if it were all below grade, it wouldn't count at all. But
That's correct.
partially is 50%.
That's correct.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. And I can't see my list. I don't believe that we have any other speakers. Were you, Commissioner Boss or Commissioner Wardlow? No. Okay, so I'm going to ask a few questions. And my question goes to staff, to Ms. Plummer. How often, in your experience, or perhaps Mr. Busk's experience, do you see an FAR increase when it's already over and it's non-conforming? Have you ever seen something like this before?
Chair Bonderson, going completely off memory, but I believe the Planning Commission has maybe seen 2 of these in the past.
Okay, and was the other one approved in?
Yes,
Okay.
it was.
Okay. I'm interested in knowing, and unfortunately, the HLC comments don't cover this, so perhaps, Ms. Pilar, you will remember. Was there any discussion in the design review portion about this section that's between the main house and the garage, and any recommendations or requests for a redesign or a consideration of reducing that in order to move the garage over, get the full garage, and get out of the setbacks completely?
Chair Bonderson, I don't recall specific comments about, I think what you're referring to is the library room here, demolishing that.
Or reducing it, not necessarily
Or
demolishing.
reducing it. And no, I don't believe that they commented on that specifically. Most of the discussion was just about how the new structure would relate to the existing historic resource and making that compatible.
Thank you. And when we see projects like this, not exactly like this, but projects that are non-conforming, and then they are, something is being proposed, and often there's an effort from both the applicant and from staff to improve the conditions and bring it closer to today's current regulations. Would the city have at any point encouraged them to rethink design to pull the modified areas out of the setback as much as possible to get it to today's 10-foot standard?
Chair Bell Anderson, yeah, of course, when we receive applications for a modification, we do want to know, what avenues you might have explored on the applicant side, to make it as conforming as possible. I think the challenge with this is that, they have a floor plan that is vested, so to specifically ask them to remove it, that isn't something staff would usually ask. We might inquire, did you explore it, but actually requiring it from staff supportability, no. Yeah, hopefully
Thank
that
you.
answers your question.
And my final question with regard to this is, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, there are very clear permits with square footages and information that whether it's graphic or verbal, demonstrates that this project, this property, I should say, was permitted all the way through. And my curiosity is, at what point was this section in between the garage and the main house built? And was it built with permits? Was it built with the original house, or was it built with the garage later on? Or on its own?
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. So yes, there are clear permits for this. The original house, as I said, was done in 1923. The next permit was for the garage and driveway, and then there were subsequent permits. Let me see, for...
I can answer that question.
Oh, go ahead.
The library, which we're reducing in order to push the garage over, was original to the construction of the house. It was symmetrical with what we call the music room, which is on the east side. There was a permit in 1956 for adding a powder room on the back side of the library, so you won't see it from the street. So part of moving the garage over is that powder room is getting sliced down by a couple of feet, as well as the library.
Thank you. My next question after Ms. Plummer would have provided that was to have you come up and share with us what types of consideration you had given. Now, you just mentioned that you've already reduced the square footage a bit and sliced down the powder room. Have you, or had you at any point considered reducing that space that you call the library further to pull the garage more, even more so, into the setbacks and reduce it out of the setback as much as you could?
Yeah, so there is a little bit of a tie-in with the street cut for the driveway, the masonry walls that are original to that, to the street and the lot development would need to be torn down and replaced as well, because then you'd have a highly angled driveway to get back to the existing apron onto the street. And in honesty, from somebody that fell in love with the house, mostly on the interiors, I wasn't really in love with the street facade. I think it's a bit dark and dingy, but we're going to fix that. The cut and inlaid marble fireplace in that library is exquisite, and the library itself is a very nice, it's a very handsome room. I do regret cutting it down in size, but I did feel it was necessary in order to not ask for some ridiculous single-car garage to be lumped onto the house, thinking that from a symmetry standpoint, would be somewhat of an eyesore in the neighborhood. The dual fireplaces right now that also add to that, technically I call this a Dutch colonial, but that generally are on both ends of these Dutch colonials, would then be useless. There's no fireplace in the kitchen. There's no fireplace in the second-story bedroom. That chimney stack just does feed the library fireplace. So eliminating the library in total, I thought, one, would damage the original architectural intent.
Yeah, you don't have to go into any further detail because we're not a design board. I just wanted to understand if any consideration had gone into it, and it sounds like quite a bit has been. And my last question, maybe you will have a better memory. Was any of this ever discussed at HLC?
No. They knew I was intent on cutting into the library. That was discussed, but not removing the library altogether. There was no recommendation for that.
Okay, and I'm going to go back to staff. At any point, this is going to go back to HLC. At any point, if HLC members listen to this hearing and they get turned on to this conversation, is there any opportunity or reason for them to be able to talk about this again?
I think Commissioner, apologies, Chair Bonderson, there's some other things to consider as well, given the historic significance of the resource and that, you know, as it stands right now, the architectural historian has reviewed the improvements and very specific concern was given to the front facade and maintaining all of its character-defining features. I know the owner mentioned the chimneys, for example.
The symmetry.
Symmetry, exactly. So, you know, yeah, I think that they're going to have a little bit more feeling towards protecting the significance of the resource and making sure it's not going to be a negative impact to that.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. And, you know, I just wanted to make sure that we understood that before we go into deliberations and to give Mr. Curtis some more information so he can feel like he was heard here today. So if we don't have any other questions, I will give you a second for questions. And before I call on anyone, I just want to say my screen isn't working, so I don't have any, I haven't had, I'm doing it by sheer visual. But I know that Commissioner Wiscombe would like to speak. Can you just set this up? Can you fix this? Go ahead. It's your turn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If we're into deliberations, I think the height of the house has been reduced. There's an increase in the interior setback on the west side to approximately 5 feet. I don't think Mr. Curtis feels that's sufficient, but I think that by pulling the garage back and conforming to the front setback, which I think is very important, I think good progress has been made and a compromise should be made that allows that. And again, there's a waiver for the reduced garage width, and you know, that's a sacrifice on the owner's part to reduce the garage width of the house to further get it in the further increase the interior setback. So I can absolutely support the modification for the interior west setback. I mean, perhaps, Ms. Plummer, perhaps you can put your recommendations back up just so we can all cover them. And I can also support the modification to the FAR to 99%. I think that this is a house of, because this is a structure of merit, I think it really involves consideration to making it livable, but maintaining that structure of merit. And I'd like to also commend the applicant owner for the improvements, not only to the garage, which right now I would consider an eyesore, no offense, and also to the south elevation of the house, which I think is really going to change the character of it. And I just find it to be a very nice design. So I can definitely, and also I can support the environmental review. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Next, we have Commissioner Lodge, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I concur with Commissioner Wiscombe's comments, and since the next-door neighbor has lived for over 50 years next door to a 1.5-foot setback, and it's going to be substantially increased as a result of the applicant doing everything he possibly could, it seems to me, to move it away by reducing the size of the library, and getting a waiver on the width of the parking garage, of the garage. I think that this is an admirable solution to the problem, and I too can support the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Commissioner Boss, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the applicant for giving really thoughtful consideration, it seems like, throughout the process. And you confirmed on site and again today that any of the feedback that came from the HLC, those recommendations were completed or were considered over the past couple of months as well. So I'll also support the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Next, Commissioner Wardlow, please.
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. Thank you, staff, and to the applicant. I am supportive of this project and really appreciate all the work that you guys have done to make this as good as it can be for yourself as well as your neighbors. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner DeLuccio?
I'm supportive also of the project. I mean, you've answered my questions in regards to the side setback, and you did all you can to increase it. It was only less than 2 feet. Now it's closer to 5. And I understand about the FAR and the and that's why I asked a question about the 2 mechanical rooms that sort of increased the FAR would have been pretty much what I gather in staff at the 95%. We also have a slope. The sloping is also, I think, a consideration probably for both the side setback and also for the FAR. So I am supportive.
Thank you. And I'm also supportive of this project. I would like to personally, again, thank, you've heard it from everyone, but I'd also like to thank the applicant team and the owner. It sounds like a very unique property, and you're coming along and making it better and, getting the historical landmark recognition is also important, but it's always, vital to listen to your neighbors and be a friendly neighbor when you have such a special property, So it sounds like you already have a relationship with Mr. Curtis. You're communicating and doing your best to work with the constraints of the site. And I just want to make sure that that relationship continues and that everyone is doing their best to make sure that whether it's drainage or whatnot, we do our best to continue that friendly neighborhood atmosphere. I also will support this project. Thank you for all your efforts. And so with that, I will request a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Yes, we have Commissioner DeLuccio.
No, I'm going to try to make a motion. Actually, recommend that we approve the staff recommendation in regards to the interior setback modification, the floor to lot modification, and also determine that the project is categorically exempt from SEQA.
And I'll second that motion. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you both. Are there any discussions on this motion? I see none, so I will ask Mrs. Sparsa, go ahead and take a roll call vote for us.
Thank you, Chair Bonderson. I'll take the roll call vote. Commissioner Wardlow.
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe.
Yes.
Commissioner Boss.
Yes.
Commissioner DeLuccio.
Yes.
Commissioner Lodge.
Yes.
Vice Chair Bauke.
Yes.
And Chair Bonderson.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you, and this decision is appealable within 10 calendar days. And again, thank you for being here today. Thank you for waiting so many hours to be heard. So now we will continue on to item 5, which we've already been informed. The project at 100 Garden Street has been postponed indefinitely and will be renoticed when it's ready to come back to Planning Commission. Ms. DeBusk, do you have any other comments on that item? Okay, and with that, we'll move on and we'll go straight to our administrative agenda. We will begin with Commissioner Boss. Do you have any staff hearing officer liaison reports for us today?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nothing from the staff hearing officer liaison, but I do have one for downtown parking.
Okay, would you like to begin you can be the first presenter.
Sure, thank you. This morning's downtown parking meeting was of interest, I think, to planning commissioners. They provided a policy and legislative update. They don't record the meetings, but they do have the materials available, and they specifically spoke to AB 2097 around parking exemptions, which came up in conversation in the staff report with the 101 Garden Street project, and also AB 68 around ADUs. So just thought that was of interest.
Great. Do we have, thank you, Commissioner Boss. Do we have any other liaison reports today? No, I don't see any lights on, so I'm going to take my turn. I have 4 items since we saw each other last, coming from ABR. On May 1st, on the consent agenda, we had final approval on a proposal at 1109 Delavina Street, and it's not something that we usually talk about here, but I felt that it would be an interest to the commission. It's a proposal to convert 1,399 square feet of commercial space into 3 short-term rentals. And it proposes a demolition of an existing garage and replacement of 4 covered parking spaces to then convert the property into short-term rentals. The next project was also on May 1st, although it was not on consent, it was on the regular agenda. We had 2 items that day. The first was a request for final approval at 709 North Milpas, which we all know well, and it resulted in being continued indefinitely with comment. So the next project that was on that same agenda, May 1st, was at 401 and 409 East Haley Street. And it's a proposal for, well, I should say it came for project design approval, and it was a proposal for a new mixed-use development project using the ADU program. It's in the MC manufacturing zone, and it's a voluntary lot merger of 2 parcels, demo of existing structures, and then construction of a 3-story mixed-use building with 26 residential units. If anyone's interested, by all means, take a look. There is a ground-level parking garage that will provide 53 parking spaces for this project as well. And it was continued indefinitely with comments. Lastly, on May 8th, on consent, there was one project which I wanted to share with you. And it's, again, a little bit unusual, but because it was unusual, I wanted to share it. It's located at 6021 Hollister Avenue, and it proposes improvements to a parking area and paving removal, and it increases planting areas, fencing, pedestrian automatic vehicular gates, trash enclosures, etc. The reason I'm bringing this up is because it's part of a larger project proposed by the Housing Authority of Santa Barbara to convert the Super 8 Motel on the corner of Hollister there at Fairview for use as supportive housing, and all site and building improvements are located in the city of Goleta. They're not part of this application that was reviewed by ABR, but they're being reviewed separately by the city of Goleta. And I thought this was interesting because it ultimately overlaps our jurisdictions, and there's multiple things happening all at once. And it's from the Housing Authority, County Housing Authority. Did I not read it? Santa Barbara County? Did I must have not read it. Or maybe I did, I don't know. Housing Authority of Santa Barbara County. There it is. But my point is that it's multiple things happening all at once, and we share part of that jurisdiction. All right, so that's the end of my ABR announcements, and I just wanted to also share, before we see each other again, the State Street Advisory Committee is going to be meeting twice next week, Monday, May 22nd, again, and 2 days later on Wednesday, May 24th. Both meetings are at the Faulkner Gallery. It's open to the public, so if anyone's interested, the Monday meeting is from 5:30 to 7:30, and the purpose is to discuss economic development, trends, and existing conditions. And then the Wednesday one also at the Faulkner Gallery, is in the afternoon from 3:30 to 6:30, and they will be focusing on discussing design concepts. And MIG, who's the consultant that's been brought on, will be in attendance in the Wednesday hearing. So if anyone here is interested in participating, these are two opportunities that are open, and I think will probably be quite a big effort. So please join us. I have nothing else. That concludes our May 11th Planning Commission hearing. And just be aware that next week, May 18th, has been canceled, and our next meeting is now tentatively scheduled for June 1st. Thank you all for being here. Have a great afternoon. We adjourn at 4:51 p.m. Thank you.